You're listening to the planet's memory, where time breathes and the Earth remembers. What if the world was older than we ever imagined? The story begins in silence. In the darkness before light had meaning, there was only motion, soft, unseen, endless. A dust of forgotten stars drifted through the void, each fragment a whisper of something yet to become. There was no up, no down, no breath, only the slow gathering of possibility. From that silence, the Earth began to take form, not as a world, but as a thought, shimmering faintly in the deep breath of creation. It turned slowly, uncertain, a glowing wound of molten rock and vapor. The air was fire, the oceans only a promise. Gravity pulled like memory, gathering fragments of stardust and lost gas into a single body that pulsed with heat. The Earth was dreaming, though it did not yet know it. A dream made not of images or sound, but of energy folding in upon itself. Maybe the first dream wasn't about life at all. Maybe it was about balance, the way heat meets cold, or silence meets the hum beneath it. The planet turned, molten and awake in its own strange way, wrapped in a storm of ash and lightning. Time had not yet learned to count, and yet it was already beginning. Every ripple of magma, every spark of collision, they were moments in a rhythm the universe would someday call history. And still, beneath it all, something was waiting. Beneath the chaos, there was an order no eye could see. Elements fused, broke apart, and found each other again. Hydrogen met oxygen, iron sank, silicate rose. The Earth was sculpting itself, not by design but by persistence. The same persistence that would one day carve mountains and whisper through rain. We can almost hear it now. The faint heartbeat of magma under pressure, the hiss of new stone meeting ancient dust. It's strange to think that the first music of our planet was not birds or wind or water, but the sound of rock cooling into silence. Every bubble of gas, every collapsing fissure, was a note in a symphony too slow for human ears. From there, the Earth began to breathe again, not in air but in cycles, pressure and release, heat and calm. Its crust folded upon itself like thought forming language. Each eruption, each calm, a lesson in patience. The dream was long, and it was lonely. And yet, what if loneliness itself was part of the design? What if the void had to be silent first, so that memory could form? The young Earth floated, glowing softly beneath an unlit sky. All around it, the cosmos watched, or maybe it didn't. Maybe the universe doesn't need eyes to witness. It only needs time. Geologists tell us that in those first 100 million years, the surface boiled and cooled again and again. Oceans evaporated, fell as rain, then rose as steam once more. Volcanoes breathed like sleeping lungs. Iron storms crackled against the newborn crust. And through all of it, the chemistry of life, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, was quietly arranging itself into meaning. To call it life would be too soon. To call it death would be too late. It was something in between, a long exhale of possibility. We drift now across that molten world, watching it calm. The glow fades, the air thickens, the crust hardens, though beneath it, magma still rolls like a memory, refusing to fade. The Earth is learning to hold silence, to keep secrets, to wait. Somewhere, in that vast quiet, the planet might have realized it existed, not as a mind, but as awareness, a pulse, a rhythm, a recurring pattern. And maybe that's all consciousness ever was. Not thought, but repetition, not knowing, but remembering. Billions of years later, we would call it geology, the record of change, the archive of pressure, the language of stone. But long before we arrived, the Earth already knew the story we'd someday try to tell. It wrote it in layers of basalt and dust, in the shimmer of iron, in the shape of silence. Maybe it's still dreaming now, through us, through our breath, through the warmth beneath the crust that never stopped moving. The same energy that once boiled oceans now beats quietly in our veins. The same minerals that shimmered in darkness now build our bones. So when we look up at the night sky and wonder how it all began, perhaps the answer isn't out there at all. Perhaps it's right here beneath our feet, where the earth still turns, still hums, still remembers, and if the planet could dream, perhaps it would still be dreaming of us. The first stars were already ancient when the earth is still molten. Their light arrived like memory, crossing distances so vast that even silence seemed to travel with it. Those stars had lived and died long before our world took shape, and yet their dust became part of us. Every atom of iron in our blood, every trace of calcium in our bones, was once forged in their fading hearts. In that deep time, the universe was young and restless. Supernovae bloomed like brief, burning thoughts across the darkness. When they ended, their light lingered, faint, but enough to teach the newborn earth how to shine. The atmosphere was thick with volcanic smoke, and the sky glowed red with ash and plasma. Lightning danced across endless oceans of vapor. Through the haze, the reflection of starlight trembled on waves that had no shore. It was here, in this dim half-light, that the earth learned the rhythm of brightness and shadow, of becoming visible, then fading again. Night and day did not yet exist, but the pulse of illumination had begun. Starlight fell upon stone and vapor, teaching the planet what it meant to be seen. When those first rays touched the surface, something changed. The elements began to react, not only to heat, but to presence, as though light itself carried memory. Minerals formed crystals that shimmered with a faint echo of the stars. Silicates reflected faint glows that no eye would witness for billions of years. Yet the pattern was set. Where light falls, order follows. For a moment in cosmic history, a moment longer than all of human civilization, the earth glowed faintly on its own, not with fire but with inheritance. The radiance of dying suns still lingered in every rock and ocean, in the invisible heat that hummed beneath the crust. Even the darkness was full of the memory of light. The stars continued their ancient ritual, burning themselves into dust so that others might exist. Hydrogen became helium, then carbon, then the complex elements that would someday become us. The universe was learning chemistry, and the earth was its quiet pupil. Over time, as the planet cooled, the starlight no longer met fire but water. The oceans began to form, vast, slow mirrors that caught the glow of the cosmos above. It was the first reflection, the first time the universe looked back at itself. Those waters shimmered under an alien sky, each ripple a memory of light long gone. We can imagine it now, a world without continents, covered in ocean, wrapped in haze. The stars above were few, but bright enough to shimmer like thought on the skin of the sea. The planet turned, and the starlight shifted, a cosmic heartbeat echoing across the waves. In that glow, something began to awaken in the chemistry of water. Energy danced between molecules, creating delicate patterns that bordered on life. Perhaps it was only coincidence. Perhaps it was the beginning of everything. Whatever it was, the stars had become teachers, and the earth a student of light. It's strange to think that all the beauty we now see, every sunrise, every ocean reflection, every flicker of lightning, was first learned from those forgotten suns. Their deaths became our beginnings. The starlight that fell upon the young planet carried both an ending and a promise, that nothing truly disappears. It only changes form. Even now, billions of years later, we carry that lesson within us. Every glimmer in the night sky is a reflection of what once was. We gaze upward, searching for meaning, not realizing the same light already burns quietly within. The glow of the stars is not just above us. It is in our cells, our breath, our memory. As the earth continued to cool, night and day began to divide. The planet tilted, turned, and began its slow rotation into rhythm. The heavens moved with it, constellations forming, dissolving, reforming in new shapes. For the first time, the planet experienced shadow. Darkness became not the absence of light, but its counterpart, a necessary silence between moments of brilliance. Every dawn that followed was a memory of those first cosmic lessons. Every flicker of fire in a human hand, every spark of discovery, was an echo of that same inheritance. The ancient stars teaching us still, the glow we chase has always been a reflection of where we began. And so, when we stare at the sky, wondering what it all means, maybe we are not searching outward at all. Maybe we are remembering something buried deep in time, that once before thought, before history, before breath, the earth itself learned to glow. Perhaps the stars never stopped teaching. Perhaps the lesson was never about light, but about remembering the warmth of existence itself. Before the continents, before breath, before even the concept of life, there was only water, endless, moving, waiting. The first oceans were not blue but silver, thick with minerals, glowing faintly in the heat of the planet's young skin. They boiled beneath the faint light of distant suns, and when they cooled, they began to listen. The oceans were the Earth's first memory. Every drop carried the trace of stars, the minerals of mountains that did not yet exist, the chemistry of things that had not yet become alive. When rain fell for the first time, it was not the gentle sound we know today. It was steam meeting flame, sky collapsing into sea. Each drop wrote a story on the cooling crust, and the oceans began to record. As the water deepened, it began to learn the rhythm of gravity and wind. Waves formed, then broke, then formed again, each motion a cycle, each cycle a kind of thought. It was repetition, but not without meaning. The earth was thinking through the oceans, testing patterns, rehearsing memory. Within those restless depths, elements began to combine. Carbon met nitrogen, iron sank to the bottom, while lighter minerals drifted like ghosts in suspension. Energy flowed between them, forming fragile networks of reaction. In those reactions, something remarkable happened. The oceans started to remember themselves. The memory was not words or images, but continuity, a persistence of pattern. A molecule formed, then broke apart, then formed again, slightly changed but still connected to its own beginning. That cycle was the first hint of what we would one day call life. Not a creature, not a spark, but a memory that could move through matter. The tides came and went, guided by the pull of a moon that had just begun to find its orbit. The oceans rose and fell like lungs, breathing for a planet that had not yet dreamed of heart. In their rhythm, the first sense of time emerged, the slow awareness that change was happening, that moments were not endless but connected. If you could stand there, at the edge of that newborn world, you would not see blue. You would see iron-red seas, shimmering with volcanic light. You would feel the hiss of minerals turning to clay, the pulse of heat beneath your feet. The air would taste of metal and salt. It would not feel alive, but it would sound like something preparing to be. Over millions of years, those oceans became laboratories of memory. Sunlight touched the surface, and new reactions began. Complex molecules formed that could not only survive, but replicate. With each cycle, they carried forward the traces of what came before. In that way, life did not begin with a spark, but with remembrance. The ocean was not just the cradle of life, it was its first teacher. From the beginning, everything that lived learned to remember through water. Even now, the chemistry of our blood mirrors those ancient tides. We carry the ocean inside us, its salt, its rhythm, its echo of the beginning. Sometimes when we listen to the waves, we are not hearing the present at all. We are hearing the oldest sound on earth, the pulse of a memory that never ended. The water that falls as rain today has touched every form of life that ever lived. It has washed the bones of trilobites, flowed through the roots of ancient forests, circled the veins of extinct creatures, and still it returns. Still, it remembers. Perhaps that is why the ocean feels alive, even in silence. It is not just a body of water, it is a body of memory. Every current carries fragments of the past, dissolving and reforming, never still, never forgetful. If the planet had a soul, it would sound like this: the steady motion of water against stone, the repetition of existence, the calm of endless return. Billions of years later, when we look at the sea, we think we're watching waves, but the waves are watching us too, reflections of what they've already known. The water remembers falling as rain over the first continents, freezing as ice, melting again into rivers that fed the roots of civilizations. It remembers our beginnings, and it will remember our endings. And maybe that's what memory really is. Not holding on, but returning, not permanence, but the patience to repeat. The oceans learned this first, and we inherited their way of being. Even now, when we close our eyes at night and drift towards sleep, our minds move like tides, washing, dissolving, returning. Perhaps that too is an echo of those ancient waters. Perhaps memory itself was born from the sound of waves, learning to rise and fall with time. And if that's true, then every dream, every heartbeat, every breath we take is just another tide in the ocean of the Earth's remembering. For a long time, there was only water. The surface of the world was a restless mirror, an endless horizon of liquid motion. Beneath it, the crust shifted and folded like the slow turning of a thought. Heat gathered and escaped. Minerals melted and rose again. And then, after ages beyond imagination, something stirred. A movement so subtle that only the planet itself could feel it. The first fragments of land rose quietly from the deep, trembling in the breath of volcanic light. They did not rush upward, but drifted, like ghosts finding form in fog. Steam rose from the surface where rock met ocean. Lava hissed and cooled, becoming black stone. The continents were being born, not in thunder, but in patience. Each ridge that lifted carried the memory of the sea that had once covered it. Trapped within the rock were traces of salt, whispers of ancient tides. As these fragments broke the surface, they caught the faint starlight and reflected it, the first glimmer of solid ground beneath the sky. The world had gained a horizon. The earth was learning structure. It was no longer only rhythm and flow, but resistance and balance. Land shaped water, water shaped land. They became partners in an endless conversation, sculpting one another without words. Rivers carved their way through cooling crust, and mountains began to imagine height. From above, if there had been an eye to see, the young continents would have looked like bruises on the skin of the ocean, dark, irregular, pulsing with fire. They shifted constantly, pulled by the deep currents of molten stone beneath. Every movement was slow, but full of purpose. The crust was alive, drifting over the hidden heart of heat. The continents carried within them the story of change. As they moved, collided, and broke apart, they began to form cycles, a dance of destruction and renewal. When one piece sank back beneath the waves, another would rise. Over billions of years, they rearranged themselves into shapes. The earth would wear like faces. None of them would last forever, but each left a trace, a chapter in the planet's autobiography. Even now, we can feel their movement beneath us. The ground we stand on is not still. It glides on molten rivers deep below. Mountains are not monuments, but waves frozen mid-crest. Every stone is still in motion, only too slow for us to see. These early continents gave the oceans their edges, and in doing so created life's first sheltered places. Bays and tidal pools formed where the sea met land, catching fragments of organic matter, protecting them from the storm of the open waters. Here, in the warmth between land and sea, the first cells began to find home. It is strange to think that the rise of continents was not just geological, it was emotional. The planet was learning boundaries. It was beginning to understand separation and reunion. Every collision between landmasses was violent, yet necessary. Out of those collisions came mountains, rivers, and the space for air to move. Out of destruction came breath. Over time, the continents began to wander. They drifted like sleeping giants, carrying memories of their births. Erosion softened their edges, rivers traced their veins, and dust from their bones settled into the sea. Even the wind that crossed them carried a kind of memory, of warmth, of silence, of movement. When we look at a map today, We see outlines and borders, but what we are really looking at is time. Each line is a scar, each mountain a frozen wave. The continents are not separate from the ocean. They are its extensions, pauses in its rhythm. The planet too remembers. Beneath the crust, the record of these movements remains, folded and pressed together, layer upon layer. Scientists read them like pages of an ancient book, but even their knowledge touches only the surface of the story. The true memory of the Earth is deeper still, buried where pressure turns rock into language and heat into breath. Perhaps the continents never stopped rising. Perhaps in some way they are still emerging, not from the sea but from the memory of the sea. Every mountain we climb was once part of the ocean floor. Every pebble was once carried by waves. The ground beneath us is ancient water, dreaming itself solid, and maybe that is what the Earth was always trying to say, that everything which seems still is only moving too slowly for us to notice, that all forms are temporary, and that the memory of motion never ends. Even now, when the wind crosses a desert plain or waves strike a distant cliff, that same old conversation continues. The land remembers the sea, and the sea remembers the land. Together they are still writing the story of the Earth's awakening, a story that began when continents rose like ghosts from the deep. There was a time when the surface of the world was never still. The continents slept beneath clouds of ash and storm, drifting like slow thoughts across an endless ocean. For ages they moved in silence, colliding, breaking, sinking, reforming, until one night something changed. The planet's rhythm shifted, and the continents began to awaken. The air was heavy with fire. Volcanoes lit the horizon, painting the sky with red dust. Lightning flickered through thick clouds of steam, illuminating coastlines that had never seen dawn. The crust trembled. Mountains rose as if stretching after a billion-year slumber. In that moment, the Earth seemed to remember that it was alive. The night of awakening was not a single event, but a slow revelation, a realization written in stone. Deep beneath the surface, molten rock surged upward, carrying with it the memory of the planet's inner heat. The continents were breathing again, inhaling magma, exhaling ash. Each eruption was both destruction and creation, both death and birth. As plates moved, the shapes of the world began to change. The outlines of future lands emerged, the bones of mountains that would one day cradle forests, the shadows of valleys where rivers would run. The Earth's surface cracked and folded like skin under pressure. It was pain, yes, but also growth. The continents were becoming conscious of form. If we could stand there, on that ancient shore, we would see no life, no trees, no birds, only rock and vapor. And yet, in that desolation, something profound was happening. The planet was sculpting its identity, finding the balance between chaos and order. The night burned, but within the fire was purpose. The continents moved with a kind of dream logic. They were not guided by intent, but by the slow pull of gravity and heat. Their motion was both random and inevitable. One collided with another, fusing into a vast supercontinent. Elsewhere, one cracked apart, sinking beneath the waves. The cycle of union and separation had begun, a rhythm that would never end. Even in the stillness of night there were whispers of what was coming. In the fissures between plates, water seeped down, meeting fire in secret chambers. The two forces, opposite yet inseparable, met and transformed each other. Steam rose again, carrying minerals upward, cooling into new rock. The planet was recycling itself, turning memory into landscape. It's easy to think of continents as ancient and unchanging, but in truth they are fragile. They float upon an ocean of molten stone, balanced by the quiet struggle between buoyancy and gravity. Every mountain we know today was once part of the ocean floor, thrust upward in the slow violence of awakening. Every valley was once filled with lava, now softened by wind and time. And so the continents dreamed of stability. Even as they continued to move, they dreamed of forests, of rivers, of creatures that would one day walk upon their backs. Though they did not yet know it, They were preparing the stage for life, building foundations for oceans to calm and skies to clear. The night was ending, and the first hints of dawn began to shimmer across the horizon. If the planet could feel, perhaps it felt relief. The endless churning was beginning to find rhythm. The fever was cooling. The continents, now scattered and alive, had become the Earth's first memory of permanence, though permanence too would prove to be an illusion. For millions of years they would drift across the mantle, gathering into supercontinents, and then breaking apart again. Pangaea, Rodinia, Gondwana, each a fleeting dream, each destined to vanish, but the pattern endured. The memory of awakening remained in every stone, every ridge, every fold of the crust. Even now, the continents are not asleep. They move beneath us, a few centimeters every year, slow enough to escape our notice, but unstoppable all the same. Beneath the calm surface of our cities and forests, the same ancient forces still breathe, still shift, still remember. When we look at a map of the Earth, we see boundaries and shapes, but what we are really looking at is movement captured mid-step, a snapshot of a planet in motion. The continents are not fixed. They are stories being rewritten by pressure, by heat, by time itself. The night the continents awoke never truly ended. It simply slowed, stretching across eons, hidden beneath the calm of daylight, and somewhere beneath our feet, the dream continues, a slow, deep awareness pulsing through stone. Perhaps that is the planet's secret. It never stopped dreaming. It only learned to dream more quietly. Beneath the calm of mountains and oceans, the Earth still burns. Its heart, hidden under miles of rock, moves like a slow heartbeat, steady, ancient, eternal. The fires beneath the crust have never gone out. They only quieted, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. When the continents cooled, it seemed the planet had found peace. But deep inside, heat continued to flow, pressing outward against the stone that held it. Rivers of magma wandered through the mantle, drifting like molten thoughts. They carried the memory of creation, the warmth of the first collisions, the fury of the planet's youth. Every tremor, every eruption, every distant quake is that same memory returning. The Earth is never truly still. Even as we sleep, its interior churns, transforming old rock into new. What we call destruction is only the process of remembering, the planet speaking in the language of fire. Long ago this fire reshaped the surface again and again. Mountains rose and vanished. Oceans opened and closed. Continents drifted apart, guided by currents too slow for eyes to see. From the outside the world appeared calm, but inside it was alive, a living engine of pressure and release. The core glows with a heat left over from the planet's birth, mixed with the decay of elements too ancient to name. It hums like a furnace, silent but constant. The energy from that core travels outward, meeting the solid crust in waves. Sometimes it seeps gently, warming the ground in invisible breath. Sometimes it erupts, tearing the surface apart to begin again. If you could stand at the edge of one of those hidden rivers, you would hear the sound of the planet thinking, slow, resonant, full of memory. The magma moves like thought, shaping everything it touches. Even now, the world we live on is being rewritten from beneath our feet. The forgotten fires are not gone, they are patient. They rest beneath mountains that once rose from their heat, beneath cities that sleep above their quiet strength. We walk over them every day, unaware of the living world below. Perhaps that is why the Earth feels alive to us. Because it truly is. Beneath every forest and ocean, beneath every desert and field, there is motion. Slow, deep, unstoppable motion. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. Sometimes those fires reach upward again, breaking through the crust in fountains of molten rock. When they do, the Earth remembers what it once was, raw, bright, unformed. It exhales its oldest breath, and for a brief moment, the ancient and the present become one. From that fire comes new land, from destruction, creation, from heat, life. Without those hidden furnaces, there would be no continents, no atmosphere, no place for oceans to rest. The planet's quiet burning is not rage, it is renewal. We think of fire as ending, as consuming, but the fires beneath the crust are the opposite. They are beginnings, the pulse that keeps the world alive. Without them, the earth would be cold and silent, a dead rock adrift in space. Even now, in the deepest caverns, we can feel their echo. Volcanic stone holds warmth that has traveled through time itself. The same energy that once built the mountains still hums in the stones we hold in our hands. And perhaps when we light a fire, it is not invention but imitation. Our attempt to remember what the planet has always known, that warmth is memory, that flame is life. The forgotten fires beneath the crust are not gone. They are dreaming still, slowly, endlessly, shaping the world from within. They are the heartbeat we never hear, the breath that never ends, the silence that holds everything together. If the planet ever speaks, it will not be in words or wind or rain. It will be in the deep rumble of magma beneath the surface, the quiet voice of a world that never stopped burning. And somewhere far below, that voice still whispers, "I am not done yet." The sky was not yet blue. It was a restless haze of steam and light, heavy with the breath of the earth itself. For countless ages, clouds had gathered and dispersed without rain. The heat of the planet held every droplet captive. But then, as the fires beneath the crust began to rest, the air cooled and the sky remembered water. The first rain did not fall gently. It came as a roar, as a storm that would last for 1,000 years. The heavens opened, and the planet exhaled. Drops larger than any we know today crashed against newborn stone, carving rivers before there were names for them. Steam rose again and again, blurring the horizon between sky and sea. The world was being washed into shape. Each drop carried the memory of the stars, the minerals of the crust, and the quiet heat of the mantle below. Together they sculpted valleys, basins, and the first soft edges of continents. Mountains bled into rivers, rivers into oceans, and oceans into clouds. A cycle without beginning or end. The planet had discovered rhythm. It rained, not for hours, not for days, but for centuries. The sound became the heartbeat of the world. Water struck stone, hissed, cooled, and returned to the sky. The land softened, and the oceans deepened. Dust became clay, and clay began to dream of form. Beneath the endless storm, the chemistry of life was awakening. If you could stand there, if you could somehow watch it unfold, you would see the earth glowing faintly beneath curtains of rain. Lightning traced silver veins through the sky, while thunder rolled like memory over mountains yet to be born. It was chaos, but within it lay order, the symmetry of nature learning to breathe. Somewhere in the shallow pools, molecules gathered in patterns that refused to fade. Energy moved between them, repeating, remembering. The water was not only shaping the land, it was shaping the future. The first shadows of life shimmered in those ancient puddles, stirred by the rhythm of rain. The 1,000-year storm became the planet's first lullaby. It slowed the world's heat, cooled the crust, and filled the deep hollows that would become seas. The air thickened with oxygen, lightning stitched it with energy, and the first whispers of biology drifted between droplets. The rain was not just weather, it was transformation. Over time, the sound softened, the thunder became distant, the lightning faded to memory, clouds grew lighter, and sunlight broke through for the first time in eons. It touched the surface of the new oceans, and the world gleamed blue, shimmering, alive. The first clear morning must have been beyond imagination. The planet, once a world of fire, had become a world of reflection. The same rain that fell as chaos now mirrored the sky it had created. The earth had written its first poem, a poem of balance between water and stone. Yet even after the storm passed, the rhythm remained. Every rainfall since then, every river, every drop that touches the ground, is a repetition of that first 1,000 years. The pattern never ended, it only slowed. The rain that falls today is the same water, the same molecules, returning to continue a story billions of years old. We like to think of rain as gentle, but it is memory in motion. Each droplet carries within it the record of ancient oceans, of storms that carved the world, of creatures long turned to dust. When it falls, the earth listens, not as a witness, but as a participant in its own remembering. Sometimes on quiet nights, when the sound of rain fills the air, it feels as though the planet is dreaming again, dreaming of that long storm when everything was being created for the first time. And maybe it is. Maybe every rainfall is the earth returning to that 1,000-year moment, replaying the song that shaped it, the song of collision, cooling, and calm, the sound of life before life. The storm is gone, but its rhythm remains. It echoes in the pulse of tides, in the movement of clouds, in the blood that moves through us. The earth does not forget its beginnings. It only remembers more quietly now. And somewhere in every drop that falls, the story continues, a whisper from the time when the rain fell for 1,000 years, before the air was clear, before the wind could move freely across oceans and plains. The sky was thick with breath that no creature could survive. The first atmosphere was not blue but bronze, a haze of gas and fire, dense with the echoes of volcanic hearts. Carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia and water vapor mingled in restless storms, forming a veil between the earth and the stars. There was no sound then, only pressure. The planet exhaled from its inner heat and the sky answered in thunder. Lightning moved endlessly between cloud and crust, stitching energy through the heavy air. Every bolt was a spark of possibility, a test of chemistry in a world that had not yet learned to live. For millions of years, that atmosphere changed shape and color, sometimes thickening into storms that hid the planet from space, sometimes thinning enough for starlight to break through. Within that shifting balance, reactions began, slow, invisible but constant. Ultraviolet light split molecules apart. New bonds formed in their place. In that fragile chaos, the sky began to create. When rain returned, it fell through this ancient mixture, collecting gases and minerals that would feed the oceans. The air and the water learned to exchange breath for memory, memory for motion. The earth was building its lungs. Each storm was an inhalation, each calm an exhale. Then somewhere deep in the oceans, life began to answer. Tiny organisms learned to use light, breaking apart carbon and releasing oxygen into the air. It was the first transformation, the beginning of the long dialogue between life and atmosphere. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sky began to change. Oxygen was dangerous then, a radical force. It oxidized the very minerals it touched, painting the world in new colors. Iron turned red, and stone began to rust. The earth itself was being dyed by breath. The great oxidation had begun, a slow dawn that would last hundreds of millions of years. For the first time, the planet began to glow with the faintest trace of blue. The haze thinned, and sunlight reached the ground more freely. The balance shifted. Gases that once choked the sky began to dissolve into oceans, locked away in stone. Above, oxygen rose and gathered, layer upon layer, until a new kind of protection formed, the ozone. For the first time, the Earth could shield its own surface from the harshness of the stars. It is strange to think that the air we breathe is ancient, that it has been breathed before by volcanoes, by oceans, by forms of life we can no longer imagine. Every molecule of oxygen, every whisper of nitrogen, has traveled through countless transformations to arrive here. The wind that moves across our faces tonight carries the memory of those first breaths. The atmosphere was not simply born, it evolved, it learned patience, it learned balance, it became the silent partner of life itself. Without it, the seas would have boiled away. With too much of it, the world would have frozen. It found the middle ground between chaos and calm, the narrow rhythm where existence could rest. Even now the air is alive with movement. It rises and falls with temperature and light, moves across continents, circles the poles, and returns again. We do not see it, but we feel it. The soft reminder that every breath is borrowed from the same endless cycle. The air we inhale tonight may once have risen from a volcano, may once have cooled the feathers of a prehistoric bird, may once have drifted through the lungs of another world entirely. Perhaps that is why the wind feels familiar. Because it is not new, it is memory, repeating itself through motion. The same molecules that formed in ancient skies still whisper above us, still carry the scent of storms and the hush of space. And when we breathe, we take part in that memory. We are not separate from the atmosphere, we are its continuation. The air does not belong to the past, it is the past, still in motion, still remembering. If the planet could sigh, this would be its sound, the long, unbroken breath of time, flowing from the first storm to the present, from fire to calm, from silence to song. And in that breath, even now, the earth continues to remember what it once was, a world learning how to breathe. Long after the rain had fallen, when the continents were still finding their shapes, and the air had just learned to breathe, the oceans began to dream. They stretched across the world, vast and silent, reflecting a dim orange sky. Beneath the surface, something stirred, not yet alive, but no longer still. The oceans held every element of creation within them. Hydrogen and carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus, whispers of sunlight and echoes of lightning. Each wave was a chemical experiment, a conversation between heat and time, and in that conversation, something began to remember itself. At first it was nothing more than pattern. Molecules arranged themselves in delicate spirals, broke apart, and then formed again. But the repetition was not meaningless. It was memory. Water was teaching matter how to hold form, how to persist through change. The planet did not notice. It turned quietly beneath the stars, its tides rising and falling like a slow heartbeat. Yet within those depths, a miracle was unfolding. Life was beginning to think about itself, not in words or awareness, but through chemistry, through the steady rhythm of survival. Tiny structures drifted in the shadows, carrying fragile codes made of carbon chains. Some dissolved, others endured. Those that lasted carried something new, the first inheritance. It was not yet blood or instinct, but the idea of continuity. For the first time, the universe had found a way to remember through living things. Sunlight touched the surface, filtering down through layers of mineral haze. It struck these early forms and gave them energy, a pulse of warmth that would one day become metabolism. The ocean became a mind, not conscious, but aware in its own deep, patient way. Perhaps that is why the sea has always seemed alive to us, because it was the first to feel, the first to hold memory, not in thought, but in rhythm. Every wave that rises and falls is a continuation of that first dream, the one where water imagined life. As time passed, complexity deepened. Chains of molecules grew longer, folded into shapes that could react, adapt, even protect themselves. Each cycle of the tide refined them, like the planet's own heartbeat shaping its offspring. The ocean was sculpting biology in silence. Then came the first spark of autonomy, a boundary, a membrane, a self, a fragile bubble that separated inside from out, chaos from pattern. Within that boundary, reactions became private, contained. The first cells had arrived, and with them the dream of life became real. It did not happen in a single place or moment. It happened everywhere at once, in warm vents beneath the sea, in tidal pools kissed by lightning, in deep trenches where sunlight never reached. The ocean dreamed in many voices, and each dream gave rise to a different kind of life. From those beginnings came movement, hunger, and replication. The sea learned to renew itself endlessly. The planet, once silent, now hummed faintly with the rhythm of being. Life had become the ocean's memory, carried in every drop, every current, every wave. Billions of years later, we can still feel that connection. The salt in our blood matches the salt of those first seas. The balance of our chemistry mirrors the balance that sustained the ocean's dream. We are walking echoes of that first experiment, carrying its memory inside us. Sometimes, when the wind crosses the shore or the tide pulls against the sand, it feels like a whisper from that ancient time, as if the ocean still remembers what it created. Perhaps it dreams even now, dreaming through us, through forests and creatures and civilizations. Life began not because the universe wanted complexity, but because the sea could not stop remembering. It held the pattern too long, repeated it too many times, until memory itself became alive. And maybe that is all we are, the continuation of the ocean's thought, the breath of water given form, the echo of its first quiet dream. Even now, when we stand by the shore and watch the waves, we are looking into the oldest mirror. The reflection that stares back is not just ours. It is the memory of the oceans that dreamed before we existed, and will continue dreaming long after we are gone. The sea has never stopped. It only changes shape, from tide to rain, from mist to vein, from thought to silence. And through it all, the dream continues. Long before eyes existed to see it, light had already become life. The oceans still ruled the earth, vast, green-grey, and endless, when a new miracle began to shimmer just beneath their surface. It was quiet and visible at first, a transformation no one witnessed, yet it changed everything. Within the shallow waters, where sunlight filtered through mist and mineral haze, tiny cells began to learn something new: how to turn light into energy. It was not fire, not heat, but a gentler kind of flame. Photosynthesis, the dawn of living light. At first it was an accident. Molecules that once absorbed sunlight for warmth discovered how to keep that energy, how to transform it into sustenance. The process was elegant in its simplicity. Light met pigment, pigment met chemistry, and together they began to build life from the air. Carbon dioxide dissolved into the water, and oxygen, that strange and reactive gas, was quietly released. The change was almost imperceptible, but the oceans began to glow, not with brightness, but with clarity, a pale emerald tint spreading through the waters, the signature of cyanobacteria blooming across the planet. The world was breathing in a new way. This was the first sunrise that truly mattered, not the rising of the sun itself, but the awakening of life's ability to respond to it. Every photon that touched those cells was a message from the stars, translated into growth. The universe had learned to feed itself, and with that light came transformation. Oxygen began to build in the atmosphere, reacting with iron in the oceans, staining them red with rust. The seas turned from grey to ochre, their chemistry rewritten by the quiet labor of countless unseen cells. It was not dramatic, it was patient. For millions of years, the world's surface changed color one molecule at a time. Those ancient microbes became the architects of all future life. The oxygen they released would fill the sky, making possible the breath of every creature that would one day walk the land. Yet they asked for nothing in return. They only continued to drift, divide, and glow. If we could listen closely to that ancient ocean, perhaps we would hear a rhythm, the slow pulse of photosynthesis, the steady beat of creation repeating itself, the sound of life thinking in light. The transformation was not without loss. For many early organisms, oxygen was poison. Whole species vanished into extinction as the atmosphere changed. The earth learned that creation and destruction were inseparable, that to breathe new life something old must fade. But still the light spread, still the oceans shimmered, and somewhere beneath a red-streaked sky, a balance was struck. The oxygen found its home, the carbon found its cycle, and the world began to stabilize. The planet that had once been ruled by darkness now wore a thin veil of blue, a color born from light and memory. Perhaps that was the first dawn the earth ever truly saw. Not the coming of the sun, but the awakening of its reflection. The moment the planet began to glow from within, that glow never left us. Every green leaf that sways in wind, every breath we take, every fire we light is an echo of that first translation. The daylight became food, and energy became life. We often think of light as something that simply shines, but it also remembers. It travels from stars to oceans, from cells to lungs, carrying a story billions of years old. When we stand beneath the sun today, the same photons that once touched those first living waters touch us too. We are part of that same unbroken conversation. And when the sun sets, when shadows stretch across the land, the memory of that light does not fade. It lingers in trees, in air, in the slow exhale of the planet. The dawn of living light never ended. It only learned to rest. Maybe that is what life really is. A way for the universe to keep its light moving even when the stars grow old. A slow, soft continuation of radiance, passed from cell to cell, from world to world. And as the night falls, we can almost imagine those ancient oceans still glowing somewhere in time, dreaming of the first dawn. The one that never truly went away. The light that had once been gentle began to change the world. The oceans shimmered with the work of unseen life, their quiet breathing filling the sky with something new. Oxygen. What began as a whisper became a flood. It was the great oxidation, and it would transform the planet forever. At first the change went unnoticed. The early microbes continued their slow labor, releasing oxygen as they absorbed sunlight, unaware of what they were creating. But as the gas gathered in the air and dissolved into the seas, it became a force invisible, reactive, and powerful. The world that had lived in shadow began to burn with light. The first victims were the old forms of life, the ones that had thrived in the quiet chemistry of a world without oxygen. To them, this new element was poison. It corroded their membranes, broke their bonds, and turned their world into something uninhabitable. Entire species disappeared without sound, erased by the breath of change. The earth was cleansing itself, though not in cruelty, only in transformation, where decay once ruled. Oxidation took its place. Iron in the oceans turned red, falling as rust to the seafloor, layering the planet in bands of color that would one day become rock. Even the air itself began to glow with a faint blue tint, the mark of oxygen scattering sunlight. This was the first true dawn, the beginning of the world as we know it. The sky cleared, and light moved freely through it, touching the surface of the oceans, reflecting back toward the stars. The earth had learned to shine, yet every creation carries loss. The age of oxygen was both a birth and a funeral. The ancient forms of life, those quiet architects of the early world, faded into extinction. They left no bones, no fossils, only chemical traces, a memory etched in stone. The new world rose from their remains, carrying forward the lessons they left behind. From their death came possibility. Oxygen, once a toxin, became the foundation for new forms of energy. Life that could endure its touch found strength in it. Cells evolved defenses, walls, enzymes, systems of repair. They learned to use oxygen instead of fear it, and in doing so, they unlocked power the world had never seen. It was a slow awakening. The earth was still quiet, but no longer empty. In the shallows, new life stirred, larger, stronger, more complex. The air itself fed them, and for the first time, the sky became part of the body of life. Every breath, every spark of movement was a continuation of that transformation. The death of shadows brought color. Minerals oxidized into reds, yellows, and browns. The oceans deepened into blue. Light and air began to shape the surface, softening edges, brightening horizons. The planet that had once glowed faintly beneath haze now gleamed like a living jewel. Still, beneath that beauty lay the memory of what was lost. The ancient anaerobes, those quiet dreamers of the dark, were gone. Their era ended, but perhaps they never truly vanished. Their chemistry lives on in the deepest corners of our cells, in the breath that fills us, in the mitochondria that once were independent beings, now hidden within us like echoes of the first world. The earth carries both lives within it, the one before oxygen and the one after. In every breath we take in the product of that great turning. We are made of air and light, but we are haunted by the memory of darkness. Even now the balance remains fragile. Oxygen sustains us, yet too much of it burns. The same force that gives life also destroys it. The earth learned this lesson long ago, that survival is not about perfection, but about harmony. Perhaps that is why the sky feels eternal, because it was forged in sacrifice. Every breath we take is a tribute to those that came before, the ones who built this world and vanished beneath its change. The shadows did not die completely. They live in the deep ocean, in the cold places untouched by light, in bacteria that still breathe without oxygen. They are the Earth's memory of what it once was, a reminder that even in a world of light, darkness has its place. The age of oxygen was not the end of something. It was a beginning. The planet had learned to breathe, to carry life in its air. The balance between creation and decay had found its rhythm, and from that rhythm, everything we know began to unfold. So when you breathe, slowly, softly, remember that it is not just air you draw in. It is history. It is transformation. It is the breath of the earth itself, still echoing from that ancient dawn when the shadows first began to fade. For billions of years, light had touched the earth, but the earth had never truly seen. The oceans glimmered, the mountains glowed, clouds drifted and dissolved, yet no gaze returned that light. The planet existed in a silent exchange, a world bathed in radiance, but blind to its own reflection. Then in the quiet depths of time, something extraordinary began. Within the dark folds of the ocean, among the drifting forms, born from oxygen's gift, life began to sense brightness, not to understand it, not yet, but to feel it, to respond to its warmth and rhythm. The planet's long blindness was beginning to fade. The first eyes were not eyes at all. They were patches of pigment, fragile spots of sensitivity that could tell the difference between day and night, safety and danger. Light struck the cells, triggering movement, drawing them upward, toward the warmth. It was instinct, but it was also the first spark of awareness. The earth had begun to look back. Over eons, those pigments deepened. They folded inward, forming hollows that could focus light, that could begin to shape shadows into meaning. The oceans filled with new motion, creatures rising toward the surface, following the sun like worshippers of something they could not name. The planet was discovering vision. It changed everything. For the first time, life could tell direction. It could hunt, hide, wander. The dance of survival became more intricate. The sea, once guided only by chemistry and current, became a theatre of sight and colour. Coral reefs shimmered, transparent forms drifted through rays of light, casting moving ghosts on the sand below. Each new form of vision carried the memory of its ancestors, faint eyes refining over generations, from simple sensitivity to clarity, from light to image. Evolution became artistry. Nature sculpted eyes of all kinds, compound, spherical, reflective. Some could see movement, others could see form, and eventually some could see beauty. The world itself began to change in response. Light, which had once been indifferent, now became communication. Color appeared where there had been none. Pigments in shells, scales, and leaves evolved to catch attention, to reflect identity. The planet was painting itself for the first time, using light as its brush. The sea became a mirror not only for the sky but for the living. Creatures began to see one another, to recognize, to react, to choose. Out of sight came behavior, out of behavior came memory, and out of memory came the beginnings of thought. It is strange to imagine. For most of its history, the earth was unseen even by itself, but once it learned to see, it could never go back. Every reflection, every glimmer, every shadow became part of the story of awareness. Even now, in our eyes, the earth continues to look at itself. The pigments in our retinas trace back to those first ancient cells that caught sunlight beneath the sea. Every color we perceive, every sunset, every forest, every flicker of flame is built from the same chemistry that once let the oceans sense the sun. When we open our eyes, we are completing an ancient circle. The light that left the stars billions of years ago enters us, travels through the small oceans of our eyes, and becomes thought. We are not separate from what we see, we are its continuation. The earth dreamed of vision long before we arrived, and through us that dream remains awake. The time when the earth learned to see was not the creation of life, it was the awakening of memory. For the first time the planet could hold an image of itself. Through every pair of eyes that has ever opened, from trilobite to human, the same light has traveled, searching for meaning in its reflection. And maybe, when we look at the world today, at the sea, the stars, the faces of one another, what we are really seeing is not the present but the earth remembering. Seeing is a kind of remembrance, a way for light to know where it has been. Even in darkness, that memory persists. Eyes close but the light remains, stored in dreams, waiting for morning. The cycle never ends. The universe looks at itself through the eyes of the living, and each blink is another heartbeat of awareness. Perhaps the planet never truly opened its eyes. Perhaps we are those eyes, and when we look at the world is simply looking back. Sight arrived first as a feeling, and then as form, and with it the oceans changed. Light no longer simply touched the living, it guided them. In the soft gradient between day and dark, bodies turned, edged forward, held still, turned again. A slow grammar of motion began to appear in the water. Tilt, drift, glide. The earth, once a world of chemistry and tide, discovered the language of intention. At the beginning, movement was small. Cilia beat like fields of grass under a quiet wind, pushing tiny lives through the soup of light. Flagella spun, not as engines but as whispers, turning circles into lines. The first paths were not journeys, only adjustments, toward warmth, away from acid into a pocket of calm. Yet in those adjustments lay a new possibility. A creature could change its place, and by changing place, change its future. Motion needed structure. Muscles began as threads of contractile matter, woven in tubes and sheets, answering the call of ions across tiny membranes. A pulse could ripple the length of a body and push water aside. The line between inside and outside grew stronger. You were here, the world was there, and between them stretched the narrow bridge of a stroke. With every stroke the bridge lengthened, sensation thickened into maps. Touch met light, light met flow, and together they traced contours where none had existed. To move well, a creature had to carry some shape of the world inside it. Eddies remembered, shelter recognized, a patch of warmth kept in mind long enough to be found again. In that remembering, the nervous system began to braid itself, fiber to fiber, converting the world's changes into a body's choice. Where there is motion, there is energy. Where energy is scarce, hunger appears. Hunger is not simply emptiness, it is a measuring instrument, a quiet accountant of the gap between what a body has and what a body needs. It drove the first negotiations between creature and world. Graze on molecules adrift, sift the thin rain of organics, graze again. But the ocean is economical, and what drifts is not always enough. A new idea entered the water, to feed on the living. It did not arrive with cruelty, only with possibility. If matter could be arranged into bodies, bodies could be undone and rearranged again. The first predators were not slash and chase, but close and swallow, a soft engulfing, a pocket of chemistry turned inward around another pocket. With that reversal, outside becoming inside, the ecosystem became a circle. The circle tightened and began to spin. Prey that drifted learned to veer, then to dart. Predators folded their bodies into spears, then into nets. Sensors sharpened. Pigments that once watched light, now estimated distance. The ocean filled with shadows that meant something. with glimmers that were not merely beautiful but important. Patterns repeated: move, find, feed, mend, move again. The planet discovered the arithmetic of appetite. Hunger drew lines on bodies. Fins grew from flanges of tissue, then split and stiffened into lavers. Segments stacked, hinged and braced. Armor laid down over vulnerable places like a memory that refused to fade. Gills became bellows, pumping water more efficiently across red surfaces that caught oxygen with patient insistence. Hearts found rhythm in pressure. The quiet laboratory of life turned into a workshop of solutions, and none of them were final. Yet even as speed and strategy multiplied, the sea did not become loud. It remained a library. Every chase, every narrow escape, every wound that healed contributed a page. The stories were not written in words but in scars and reflexes, in thresholds that shifted a fraction and became inheritance. The earth's memory, once layered in rock, now layered itself in nerves and muscle. Hunger stitched time into bodies. A full creature slowed, an empty one sharpened. The interval between meals measured risk against reward. Rest became meaningful, a stillness that preserved energy for the moment it would be needed. Sleep, if it can be called that, emerged as a rhythm within rhythms, an economy of quiet that stretched a life's resources across the demands of motion. Currents sculpted routes through this new mathematics. Upwellings carried nutrients, fronts and thermoclines drew invisible borders. The map inside a creature aligned with the map outside it, and migration was born, not out of curiosity, but out of need. Need is a compass, so it points without pointing, and in following it, lives assemble into patterns. The nightly rising of plankton, the slow rivers of fish, the long spirals of drifting grazers following drifting sun. What began as hunger broadened into choice, to pursue or to wait, to hide or to harden, to gamble on speed or invest in shelter. Trade-offs wrote their signatures across anatomy: a heavier shell for safety, a lighter body for flight, spines that promised damage, colors that promised confusion. The ocean learned to negotiate with itself. In this age of movement, symmetry tightened around a front and a back. Where you went mattered more than where you had been. Heads gathered senses, tails delivered force. Along the axis between them, a body carried its past as memory and its future as prediction. Anticipation, the faintest taste of what is not yet entered the sea. Still, the ledger of hunger was never cruel by design. Predation refined the many rather than erasing them. Each improvement in the chase produced an improvement in the run, in the hide, in the heel. Complexity rose not because the world demanded drama, but because it rewarded balance. The ocean kept its calm even as its narratives grew intricate, and beneath the visible duels, quiet partnerships deepened. Microbes in guts finished what teeth began. Algae hosted within tissues turned sunlight into sugar, and their hosts offered safe harbor in return. Even hunger learned to share. Cooperation is an economy too, and the sea discovered its profit. If we watch the waves now, we can still see the age of movement present in every gleam. Schools turn as one thought. Shadows fold and unfold in the seams of light. A single ripple on the skin of the water may conceal an entire conversation of needs aligning, diverging, aligning again. The story has not ended. It has only spread into forms we name. On shorelines, something waited for these new conversations. Tide pools where the sea settled into bowls of stone, places where water thinned and the world above became imaginable. Here motion met friction, and bodies that had learned to flow began learning to lift. The calculus changed. Weight became a number that could not be ignored. Fins pressed against rock and found purchase. Mouths that once filtered found new textures to test. Air, thin and sharp, offered riches to any life that could solve its problem. Not yet, but soon the ocean had taught the world to move, and hunger had given that movement purpose. The next lesson would be different, harder, brighter, For if motion could remake the sea, what would it do to the edge of land? Long after the seas had learned to move and hunger had taught life to chase, the earth took a slower breath. From the water's edge to the hills of raw stone, green began to spread, quiet at first, soft as moss along a damp rock, then bolder, taller, more intricate. The forests were coming, and the world would never sound the same again. The first trees rose from the ground like thoughts made solid. They were patient architects, drawing sunlight down into matter, turning air into trunk and leaf. Their roots reached deep into stone, breaking it gently, whispering minerals into soil. Their branches stretched toward the sky as though the earth itself wished to touch the stars. Each leaf was an act of memory, sunlight caught and transformed, stored in wood and bark and seed. In that transformation, the planet found rhythm once more. Inhale light, exhale life. The forests became lungs for the world, taking in carbon and giving back breath. Every gust of wind became a pulse between green and sky, a conversation between what lived above and what slept below. In their stillness, the forests dreamed. They dreamed of rivers forming beneath their roots, of rain wandering from ocean to cloud to leaf and back again. They dreamed of balance, of animals yet unborn who would find shelter beneath their canopies, of insects who would carve patterns into their bark, of wind that would hum through their branches like music. Silence filled those early forests, but it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of listening, the hush of a planet settling into harmony. The air grew cool beneath the shade. The soil darkened, rich with fallen leaves and forgotten years. In that quiet, life multiplied. The forests became archives of memory. Every ring within a trunk was a sentence in the long poem of the earth, the record of rain and drought, of warmth and cold, of moments when the world held its breath. Insects traced calligraphy through bark. Fungi carried messages between roots. A vast hidden network began to form underground. Filaments of exchange, threads of understanding. Through these silent networks, trees spoke without sound. They shared water, nutrients, and even warning. When one was wounded, others nearby changed their chemistry, prepared for danger. It was not thought, but it was communication, the first language of the living world. Above ground, leaves shimmered like countless tiny mirrors, turning sunlight into oxygen, oxygen into time. The sky, once harsh and thin, grew gentle. The air thickened with scent and motion. Rain fell differently now, slowed by branches, softened by green. For the first time, the planet felt comfortable in its own breathing. Life followed the forests inland. Creatures that had once crawled along shores now found homes among roots and ferns. Amphibians pressed against wet soil. Insects filled the air with whirring song, and the balance between earth and sky deepened. The forests became both shelter and stage, a bridge between land and life. From a distance the world glowed emerald. Continents that had once been grey and barren now shimmered with living colour. The forests cooled the planet, drew carbon from the air, and exhaled freshness into the wind. Climate and life became one pulse, one memory. The earth was learning stability, the art of staying alive by giving and taking in equal measure. Every forest was a mirror of time. The young trees whispered of growth, the elders of endurance, the fallen of return. Decay was not loss here, but transition, the recycling of identity. What died became soil, and what grew carried the memory of the dead within its sap. The circle of renewal was complete. In the great silence between wind and leaf, perhaps the planet dreamed for the first time, not of fire or storm, but of balance. The forests taught the earth patience. Their growth was so slow it approached stillness. Their roots so deep they touched the planet's oldest memories. If the oceans had taught motion, the forests taught rest, and yet within that rest was music. Every rustle of leaf, every creak of trunk, Every ripple of shadow was part of a larger symphony, an orchestra without sound, guided by the rhythm of sunlight. Day and night became verses, seasons became refrain. It is the sound of the earth thinking, slowly, peacefully, through leaves and wind, and somewhere within that green hush, the planet is still dreaming, of stars reflected in dew, of seeds waiting for light, of time unfolding like a leaf in morning air. The forests dreamed in silence, and through their dreaming, the world learned peace, long before language, before thought, before memory had names. The earth opened its eyes, not all at once, not in sudden brilliance, but slowly, as though light itself was awakening inside the water. In the quiet oceans, where everything still drifted in half sleep, vision began. The first eyes were small, fragile miracles, just dark patches of pigment that could tell brightness from shadow. But even that simple knowing was enough to change everything. For the first time, life could move toward the light, could seek warmth, could follow safety. The planet had found a way to see itself through the gaze of a creature. Each reflection of light was a revelation. The ocean, once an endless blur of motion, now shimmered with boundaries. Shapes began to matter. Distance began to exist. In the space between light and dark, life discovered the concept of here and there. And with that, awareness began. It must have been a strange kind of awakening, a billion tiny eyes opening across the sea, all watching, all learning. Some could only sense the presence of the sun above, others learned to trace its movement. The water, once blind, began to shimmer with direction. The world was no longer a dream, it was becoming visible. As generations passed, sight deepened, eyes folded inward, forming chambers that could focus. Light bent through curved lenses, drawing sharper edges, richer shadows, colors bloomed. What had once been mere brightness became pattern, motion, and meaning. The planet's dream had learned to look back at itself, and in doing so, it began to understand form. Predators appeared, drawn to movement, prey adapted, blending with light, hiding in the shimmer. Vision became survival. The oceans filled with quiet strategies, flashes to confuse, colors to conceal, eyes that could see farther, faster, deeper. What began as curiosity became purpose. The act of seeing became the act of living, and still behind every gaze, the earth watched through them all. The reflection of sunlight in a shell, the mirrored glint in a fish's eye, the shimmer of scales under the surface. All of it was the planet studying its own image. Every creature was a small mirror, turning light into awareness. It is strange to think that vision was not given to the world. It was earned by it, through trial and adaptation, through the patient work of evolution. The planet taught itself how to see. The oceans became full of eyes, full of reflections, billions of tiny lenses translating photons into thought. When sight finally reached the shore, it carried with it the story of its birth. Creatures that had learned to see beneath the waves now looked upon land, upon color and sky and horizon. For the first time, the earth could witness its forests, its mountains, its own vastness. It was not the seeing of one being, but of many, an endless network of vision, connected by light. Every dawn since then has been a memory of that moment, when sunlight first became consciousness. The way we watch the world now, the way we lose ourselves in a sunset, or the glimmer of the sea, is only an echo of that awakening. When we see beauty, we are remembering what it felt like to open our eyes for the first time. Maybe that is why sight feels sacred, because it carries the weight of beginnings. Every color we perceive, every shadow that moves across our vision, is the continuation of that first dream. The planet still looks through us, still watches itself through our gaze, and perhaps that is the truest meaning of seeing. Not to observe, but to connect. Not to separate light from dark, but to understand that both exist to make the other visible. The earth dreamed of eyes, and through them it found itself. The oceans no longer drifted in blindness. The world had seen its own reflection and decided to keep dreaming. There was an age when the sky forgot how to stop crying. For millions of years, storms moved across the face of the planet, like restless memories, rewriting everything they touched. The air was thick with vapor, the clouds heavy with history. Each drop that fell was a fragment of time, carving, cooling, erasing, remembering. The earth was learning to forget, and in that forgetting it began to change. The rain began quietly, a whisper of condensation rising from oceans still warm from the planet's interior. But soon the whisper became a chant, and the chant became a roar. Lightning stitched across the sky, thunder rolled from horizon to horizon, and rivers formed where no land had yet found its edge. The world had entered its long season of cleansing, for centuries that stretched into epochs. It rained, mountains melted under the persistence of water, and valleys grew deep where none had been. The land softened like clay in a sculptor's hand. Every torrent carried the dust of ages, grinding stone into sand, sand into silt, silt into soil. The rain was both destroyer and creator. The same drop that tore down also built anew. And yet, despite its power, the earth did not despair beneath the storm. It listened, it learned. Each drop carried knowledge from sky to ground, from cloud to sea, from sea back to air. The planet was rehearsing the memory of renewal, learning how to circulate, how to breathe. In the endless grey, strange beauty emerged. Oceans shimmered beneath curtains of falling water, and the air glowed faintly with the scatter of constant mist. The sun became a rumour, the moon a pale echo behind moving veils. The world was reduced to texture, the sound of rainfall, the rhythm of erosion, the music of transformation. Life endured through patience. In the depths of the sea, creatures evolved that never saw sunlight. They learned to live on chemical energy, on heat rising from vents in the ocean floor. Above, primitive plants clung to the edges of stone, drinking from an atmosphere so full of moisture it shimmered like glass. Everything adapted to the rhythm of falling water. It was in this constant storm that the planet learned humility. Every mountain that rose was destined to crumble. Every plain would someday sink beneath the flood. Permanence was an illusion. What mattered was continuation, the flow of matter, the reticus of cycles, the persistence of memory beneath motion. The endless rain carried not only water but memory, dissolved minerals, the bones of ancient creatures, the dust of vanished mountains. It spread them across the globe, blending past and present into one seamless layer. The world was being rewritten in water. Sometimes between storms the clouds would thin, and a faint light would reach the surface. The rain would shimmer in that light like silver threads, each drop falling through air that had never been still, reflecting 1,000 tiny worlds. Then just as quickly the sky would close again. The rhythm resumed. The forgetting continued. Geologists, billions of years later, would read the layers left behind by that age. Thick bands of sediment, traces of minerals only rain could have carried. They would call it erosion, deposition, metamorphosis, but the earth knew another name for it. Remembering through loss. The storms did not last forever. Even eternity has seasons. The mantle cooled, the air cleared, and the water finally found balance between sky and sea. When the rain at last began to fade, it left behind a planet transformed. The continents were smoother, the rivers permanent, the soils rich with possibility. When the first true sunlight touched that new landscape, it was as if the world awoke from a dream. The surfaces gleamed, polished by eons of motion. Lakes filled the hollows where stone had been carved away, reflecting a sky that had finally remembered blue. The endless rain had ended, but it had left its mark everywhere, and perhaps that was its purpose, to teach the planet that change is not erasure. That memory, like rainfall, can shape without destroying, that what vanishes is never truly gone, it only becomes part of what remains. Even now, when rain falls upon the earth, it is never entirely new. Every drop has been here before, 1,000 times, in 1,000 forms. It has fallen on mountains that no longer exist, flowed through forests long turned to dust, risen from seas that vanished before life began. The water remembers what the land forgets. And so, each storm that passes is a quiet repetition of that forgotten epoch, a rehearsal of renewal, a reminder that erosion is only another word for transformation. The forgotten rain still falls within us too. The salt in our tears is the same as in the ancient oceans, the same as in those endless storms. We carry the echo of that age in every cell, the patience of water, the calm persistence of time. Maybe that is why rain feels so familiar, why its sound soothes, why its rhythm feels like memory. It is not just weather, it is inheritance. It is the planet reminding us of how it learned to begin again. And somewhere in the steady patter against leaf and stone, the earth still dreams of that time, when storms rewrote the surface of memory, when each drop carved away yesterday, and when even in the forgetting nothing was ever truly lost. There came a time when the seas no longer looked the same. The surface that had once been green and grey began to deepen into a colour the world had never seen before. Blue. It was not just a change of shade, but of spirit. Light, chemistry and life began to weave together, and the ocean turned into something new. A library of light, written in motion, read by every living thing within it. The change began quietly. In the shallow, tiny plankton floated near the surface, catching sunlight and transforming it into life. They multiplied endlessly, invisible to the eye, but powerful enough to paint the seas. Each cell carried the memory of the first light, each one a glowing syllable in the ocean's new language. As their numbers grew, the balance shifted. The sunlight that entered the water was no longer scattered by dust or iron, but absorbed by life itself. The red and green wavelengths sank away, leaving the blue deep, mysterious, infinite, the color of calm, the color of time. The earth had found its reflection in the sky. In this new light, everything changed. Corals began to rise like slow-motion cities, building towers of calcium and color. Within their walls, thousands of lives found home. Fish, algae, worms, sponges, each playing its part in a living architecture. The reefs became libraries of evolution, each coral branch a page, each tide a turning. The oceans, once silent, filled with stories. The movement of plankton became sentences. The migration of whales became paragraphs. The shimmer of schools of fish became poetry written in motion. Light itself was the ink, and the sea the page. Every beam that entered the water carried a message from the sun, and every reflection sent it back, changed and remembered. Blue deepened, layer upon layer. Near the surface the color was bright, a mirror of the sky, but in the depths it became almost black, the place where light dissolved into silence. Yet even there, life persisted. Strange creatures glowed in the dark, carrying their own lanterns, bioluminescent hearts pulsing like stars beneath the waves. The ocean had become a night sky turned upside down. Scientists billions of years later would study this transformation and name it the great oxygenation of the seas, the evolution of pigments, the rise of photosynthetic life. But the Earth knew it differently. To the planet, it was a dream of light, the moment when water learned to speak in color. The blue did more than beautify, it changed everything. It cooled the planet by reflecting sunlight, regulated climate, balanced gases, and stabilized ecosystems. The ocean had become the planet's memory and its breath. Each wave that broke upon the shore carried not just salt and foam, but fragments of the story of life itself. And yet beneath that serenity, motion never ceased. Currents traveled like sentences written across the globe. The Gulf Stream, the Antarctic flow, the slow turning of the Pacific gyres. They carried nutrients, warmth, and song. They connected coral to coral, island to island, world to world. In those deepening blues, perception itself evolved. Creatures began to see in color, to use light, not only to live, but to communicate. Flashes, patterns, dances, the first languages of motion and brilliance. The sea had learned to speak, not only through sound, but through light itself. To gaze upon those waters, now is to look into time. The blue we see is not mere reflection, it is memory. It holds within it every storm that has passed, every plankton that has drifted, every coral that has reached toward the surface. It is the oldest continuity we know, a color that has never faded, because it was written by life itself. Perhaps that is why we find peace in the sight of the sea. Its color is our origin, the echo of a time when existence was simple, and survival was light meeting water. When the first creatures looked up from beneath the surface and saw the sky reflected above, they must have known, without knowing, that the world was whole. And so the oceans kept their stories, written in the shifting blue. They recorded every dawn and dusk, every extinction and return, every dream the planet ever dreamed of itself. Even now, the sea remembers in its own language, in color, in rhythm, in endless motion. Blue is not just the color of water, it is the sound of silence, made visible, the memory of light stretched thin over time. It is the hue of endurance, the soft glow of the planet. Think, and somewhere, beneath that vast reflection, plankton still shimmer, coral still builds, and life still writes its story, quietly, endlessly, in the language of blue. There came a silence after the storms, a stillness that covered the earth like memory settling into dust. The endless rain had faded, and the planet began to listen again. Beneath its surface, buried under centuries of mud and mineral, lay the bones of forgotten creatures, the architects of earlier worlds. They slept for ages, untouched, yet never entirely silent. In their stillness they whispered, "The earth has always been a keeper of secrets. Every mountain, every layer of stone is a page in its diary. Within those layers, life that once moved through water and air now waited, transformed into sculpture. Bone became mineral, flesh became quartz, breath became silence. The fossils were not dead things. They were memories turned to stone, stories the planet refused to forget. When the first winds returned, they began to uncover what the sea had hidden. Erosion, that slow hand of time, brushed away the veils of sediment grain by grain, like fingers turning the pages of an ancient book. As cliffs crumbled and rivers cut through the ground, bones began to surface, rib cages like broken harps, spines like bridges, shells that gleamed faintly in the sun. The earth was remembering aloud. Those who listened could almost hear them speak, the long exhalation of creatures who had once swum in ancient seas, the murmurs of forests that had turned to coal, the faint crackle of fish whose fins had become the first wings. Each fossil was a sentence in the story of transformation, a pause in the conversation between life and time. The wind, too, became a translator. As it moved across the stone, it carried the hollow tones of those forms. A flute made of bone, a sigh through an ammonite spiral. The air learned language from what it touched. Across deserts and cliffs, the whispers of extinction and endurance mingled, turning geology into song. In some places the whispers were gentle, the smooth imprints of leaves pressed into shale, the delicate outline of an insect caught forever in amber. In others they were monumental, the towering bones of creatures too large to imagine, half buried in the sand like the remains of dreams. Each one spoke not of death, but of continuity. The fossils taught the earth patience. They reminded it that memory does not vanish, it only changes form. The bodies that once swam, crawled, and flew had not disappeared. They had simply become part of the crust, transformed into symbols of endurance. The world had turned its own history into art. Every fossil is a paradox, motion preserved in stillness, breath captured in silence. The creatures that once built empires of coral, forests of bone, are now echoes of evolution, frozen mid-thought, yet even in their quiet, they shape the living. The calcium in our bones, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our cells, all of it was borrowed from them. We are their continuation, the moving fossils of the present. When humans finally appeared and began to dig, they did not find relics, they found voices. They read the curvature of ribs, like words, the alignment of teeth, like syntax. Each discovery was a translation, the story of a world remade countless times, a reminder that we live atop entire civilizations of stone. The fossils whispered of resilience, of worlds destroyed and reborn, of climates that shifted, of oceans that came and went. They whispered of adaptation, of the endless conversation between life and entropy. And sometimes when the wind passed through a canyon, or across a cliff face where bones slept half buried, the sound was not mere air, it was the continuation of those voices, patient, ancient, infinite. Erosion became their messenger. What time had buried, time itself revealed. The same forces that had once entombed them now set them free. The cycle of concealment and discovery mirrored life's own pattern. Emergence, transformation, return. The fossils knew this truth better than anything living. Even now, the earth carries those voices, in the crunch of gravel underfoot, in the shimmer of limestone cliffs, in the quiet of riverbeds where shells still gleam. The conversation continues. The planet hums with the residue of every age, a low vibration beneath everything we build, everything we are. And perhaps when the wind rises and passes through empty valleys, it is not only air that moves, it is memory, the long breath of creatures who once dreamed the world into being, still speaking through the architecture of their bones. The fossils still whisper, not to be heard but to be remembered, and in their silence, the earth answers not with words, but with the sound of wind through stone. Once where silence now reigns, there was water. Oceans stretched across what we now call deserts, and waves rolled over the bones of mountains still unborn. The air shimmered with salt and sunlight, and every grain of what is now sand was once part of a living shore. Then the tides withdrew, the heat rose, and the sea fell silent, leaving behind an echo that never faded. Deserts are not emptiness, they are memories made visible. Beneath their dunes entire worlds lie sleeping. Coral turned to stone, shells turned to dust, fish fossils pressed into layers of forgotten seabed. The sand itself is the language of erosion, a vocabulary of time ground fine by waves that no longer exist. When the wind moves across it, it speaks in the syntax of tides. Once there was water, now there is silence. But silence does not mean absence, it means listening, and the deserts listen still. Each gust of wind that crosses them carries whispers from a time when everything here was fluid, when sunlight danced on ripples, when plankton drifted like thoughts, when the planet sang in blue. At night the sand cools, and under the stars the memory of the sea awakens. The dunes gleam faintly, their shapes mirroring the waves that once sculpted them. The constellations above seem reflected below, as if the sea, gone for millions of years, still lingers in the pattern of stars. Perhaps it does, for the atoms of the ocean are still here, waiting for rain that will never come, remembering motion. When the wind rises, it does what the waves once did. It reshapes. Dunes shift like tides made of silence, their crests flowing from east to west in a rhythm as old as the sea itself. Even stillness, it seems, cannot escape the memory of movement. If you kneel and touch the sand, you can feel that memory, the faint coolness beneath the heat, the traces of minerals born in coral, the shimmer of silica once polished by water. The sea is still there, only slower now. Its music has become texture, its waves turn to wind. Sometimes in rare moments the desert remembers out loud. Rain falls, sudden and brief, and rivers reappear like ghosts. For a few hours the ancient ocean lives again, tiny streams etching lines through the sand, finding their old channels, flowing toward basins that remember being deep. Then, just as quickly they vanish. The water sinks, evaporates, and the silence returns, heavier but satisfied. Life too remembers. Seeds that have slept for decades awaken after a single storm. Flowers bloom, insects emerge, and the desert becomes green for a breath of time. It is as if the ocean dreams through them, waves transformed into petals, tides into color. Even in absence, life listens to what was once promised by water. The stones remember as well. Many were born beneath the waves, layered in silt and pressure. Some still hold the outlines of shells, the faint ridges of coral. When the sun strikes them, they shimmer as if the sea were trying to return through light. Erosion, like tide, exposes these traces slowly, letting the past rise grain by grain to the surface. To the untrained eye, the desert seems empty, but to the planet, it is full of fossils and forgotten currents, full of the chemistry of oceans, full of silence that was once song. The dunes may look dead, but they are the archives of a living memory. The sea's departure was never absolute. Water still moves beneath the surface, locked in stone, seeping through cracks, waiting for its chance to rise. In this way, the desert and the ocean remain connected, one visible, one hidden, two halves of a single breath. Perhaps that is why the desert feels so vast. It carries not only its own stillness, but the echo of the sea's motion. To stand in it is to stand inside a memory too large to hold, the ghost of tides, the whisper of a vanished horizon. And sometimes when wind and light align just right, you can almost see it, the shimmer of blue where none should be, the illusion of water at the edge of sight. The mirage is not deception, it is remembrance. The desert is trying to recall what it once was. Maybe the sea still dreams beneath the dunes, slow dreams made of pressure and mineral and silence, dreams that rise as wind, that move as sand, that wait as stone. The world changes, but its memory does not fade. It only changes form. The desert is proof of that. It is not what remains after life. It is life transformed into stillness. The ocean never truly left. It simply learned how to be quiet. And so when you look across the dunes and see nothing but emptiness, listen closely. The sea is still there, whispering beneath your feet. There came a season so long it could only be called an era, when warmth withdrew and the earth exhaled frost. Oceans hardened at their edges, mountains vanished beneath white veils, and continents drifted through the silence of epochs. It was not death, it was sleep, the great sleep of ice and time. The air grew thin and silver. Sunlight, once golden and alive, bent weakly through the frozen haze, scattering into pale halos that glimmered over endless plains of snow. The world slowed, rivers became glass, forests stood still beneath weighted branches, and the oceans whispered beneath a skin of ice. The earth was holding its breath. Beneath the frozen crust, the pulse continued, slow, steady, eternal. Deep currents still moved, magma still shifted. The planet's heart still beat in silence. Even when the surface seemed motionless, life persisted in hidden chambers, microbes clinging to warmth, roots sleeping in frozen soil, water molecules trembling at the edge of solidity. The planet was not ending, it was dreaming. Each flake of snow that fell carried memory, the air of ancient volcanoes, the dust of deserts, the breath of vanished forests. Layer upon layer, the snow pressed into ice, trapping moments within its crystal lattice. Time itself was being stored, compressed into glaciers that would one day tell stories in bubbles and isotopes. Ice became the language of memory. Across the surface, the continents drifted, slow, imperceptible giants gliding through frozen seas. They moved without hurry, their boundaries softened by ice. Mountains wore crowns of frost, valleys slept beneath sheets of light. The wind no longer sang but hummed, a low tone that filled the silence like a heartbeat under snow. In that stillness, Beauty took on a new form. The sky became a mirror of the ground, both white, both endless, both filled with light that had forgotten color. The sun rose and set, like a pale thought. Nights lasted months, days were brief and tender. The world was wrapped in its own reflection, and for a while nothing moved except time. But even stillness carries purpose. Beneath miles of frozen weight, the planet was sculpting itself. Ice pressed into rock, carving valleys, smoothing mountains, creating the landscapes that would shape the future. When the thaw would come, and it always would, rivers would follow these paths, carrying meltwater and memory across continents. The glaciers were artists working in silence. In the deep ocean far below the ice, life glowed softly. Creatures that had never seen sunlight pulsed with inner fire. Their light was blue, faint and patient, like stars scattered beneath the sea. They had adapted to the long sleep, living between breaths of warmth, feeding on the memory of motion. As millennia passed, the Earth continued its slow turning. The axis tilted, orbits shifted, and with each celestial breath, the frost began to wane. The ice, which had seemed eternal, began to retreat, inch by inch, sigh by sigh. Meltwater flowed from the mountains like returning dreams. Rivers awoke, oceans deepened, and the continents sighed with relief. Where glaciers withdrew, new worlds appeared. Valleys sparkled with mineral dust, rich with the promise of life. The ground, once sealed in silence, released the smell of ancient soil. Seeds that had waited in the dark began to stir. The planet, reborn, remembered its own patience, but the memory of the ice never vanished. It lived on in stone, in sediment, in the rhythm of climate that still moves between warmth and cold, expansion and retreat. Even now, in the polar caps and mountain peaks, fragments of that great sleep remain, archives of air, older than humanity, frozen thoughts of the planet itself. When we touch the ice, we touch time. Each layer we drill, each crack that forms, is a syllable of the Earth's memory, spoken back to us. It tells of volcanic breaths, of forests long buried, of storms before language. It reminds us that every cycle returns, that silence is not the end of sound, only its resting place. Perhaps the planet needed this long dream, a pause to remember itself, to gather energy for what would come. Every thaw that followed carried new life, richer, more intricate. The ice in retreat, left behind, not ruin, but renewal. The sleep of time had purified the world. And maybe that is what the ice has always meant. Not death, not stillness, but remembrance. A reminder that even in the coldest silence, motion continues, and that memory, when frozen, only waits for the warmth of return. The great sleep of ice and time was the planet's way of breathing between stories, a long glacial exhale before the next beginning. Beneath its still surface, the heart of the Earth never stopped. It only slowed to dream. And when the thaw finally came, the dream awoke as rivers, forests, and breath. A world reborn from silence, carrying within it the memory of every frozen moment. The Earth had seen itself in fire, in water, in ice. It had been molten, drowned, frozen, and still it endured. But endurance was never enough. Now the planet began to watch itself change. Continents moved like slow thoughts, creatures rose and vanished like fleeting dreams, and every extinction echoed through the deep chambers of time like a heartbeat missed, brief, sorrowful, but never final. The rhythm continued. From the quiet thaw of ancient ice, warmth returned like memory finding its way home. The oceans stirred again, carrying minerals, seeds, and beginnings. On land, forests thickened, life multiplied, and the air grew rich with breath. Beneath all this, the tectonic plates kept shifting, the slow architecture of existence pushing mountains skyward, tearing continents apart, guiding rivers as if by thought alone. The Earth was sculpting itself while watching the results unfold. It had no eyes, no consciousness in the way we imagine, And yet it knew, through the movements of its crust, through the cycles of its atmosphere, through the rising and falling of species, the planet seemed to be studying its own evolution, observing what worked, what failed, what endured. Each extinction was not a tragedy alone, but a note in a larger composition, a pause that allowed a new melody to begin. When great forests of carbon turned to coal, when massive reptiles gave way to smaller, warmer beings, the earth adjusted its rhythm. With every fall, life became more intricate, the web grew finer, more interdependent, more aware. Patterns emerged: symmetry, migration, cooperation, as if the world was learning how to think through its creations. The continents drifted endlessly, rearranging the map of memory. Where oceans once divided, mountains formed. Where deserts once slept, new seas appeared. The planet's surface was never still. It pulsed like a living thing. The drifting of Pangaea, the splitting of Gondwana, the rise of the Atlantic, these were the slow exhalations of a being remaking itself. Each movement shaped the story of life. As continents drifted apart, species diverged, evolving along separate paths. Isolation birthed imagination. Wings, shells, fur, scales, all experiments in survival. The earth was the laboratory, time the patient hand. Some creations thrived, others vanished, but all contributed to the planet's grand design, a design that had no architect but itself. There were moments of darkness, mass extinctions that silenced millions of voices at once, meteor impacts, volcanic winters, oceans starved of oxygen. The planet trembled, adapted, recovered. From each silence came renewal. When one form ended, another began. In loss, there was space for invention. Evolution was the language through which the earth remembered itself. Trial, error, persistence. It is easy now to see those ages as eras: the Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian, the Mesozoic, names we give to what the planet simply felt. But to the earth these were not categories, they were moods, shifting emotional landscapes of heat and pressure, abundance and scarcity. Each age carried its own temperament, its own song, and somewhere within these rhythms, awareness deepened, eyes became sharper, minds more complex. The first mammals, the first birds, the first warm hearts that beat in rhythm with the seasons, all of them carried echoes of the planet's earlier selves. The earth was watching through them now, not from without, but from within. Every living creature became a mirror, every gaze a reflection of the planet upon itself. Even extinction had purpose. Each vanishing form made room for another. The dinosaurs, once rulers of the land, fell beneath a sky of ash, and from their absence, mammals flourished. The earth did not mourn the end of an era. It adjusted its breath. It understood that every death was a kind of rearrangement, every collapse a new opportunity for balance. If the planet could speak, it might have said, "I am not alive the way you are, but I remember, through you I continue." The earth's consciousness was diffuse, spread through forests, oceans, coral reefs, and the delicate chemistry of air. It was not a mind, but a memory in motion. With each epoch, that memory grew more intricate. Species learned to migrate, to cooperate, to build. Some looked upward to the stars, not knowing that in doing so, they were fulfilling the planet's oldest desire to see itself from afar. The earth had finally evolved something that could look back and understand. We are part of that awareness. Our bones hold the calcium of ancient seas. Our blood carries the salt of vanished oceans. When we think, the planet thinks through us. When we wonder, it is the earth remembering its own journey from chaos to consciousness. The continents still move. The wind still writes on the face of stone. Volcanoes breathe. Glaciers advance and retreat. Forests rise and fall. And through it all, the rhythm continues. The planet watches, not with eyes, but with patience, the patience of something that has already endured everything. Perhaps that is what evolution truly is. Not progress, not perfection, but the steady heartbeat of a world that refuses to stop dreaming. And as long as something lives, as long as one breath follows another, the earth will keep watching itself evolve, quietly, endlessly, through every creature that opens its eyes and dares to wonder where it came from. The silence did not last forever. Deep beneath the cooling crust, the planet's old heartbeat began to quicken once more. What had slept through the long frost began to stir, molten thoughts rising through the fractures of stone, trembling with the memory of creation. After ages of quiet ice and slow drift, the earth exhaled heat again. Fire returned to the sky. It began with whispers in the deep mantle, pressure gathering, magma rising, the low hum of energy remembering its path upward. Then came the first shudder, the first glow upon the horizon, and the soft red breathing of the volcanoes. The world that had been silent for so long was finding its voice again, a voice made not of words but of molten syllables and ash. The volcanoes roared softly, as though cautious not to break the calm the planet had earned. Fire spilled down slopes like liquid sunlight, and rivers of stone carved new continents. The sky turned crimson with dust, painting the sunsets in colors that felt ancient, like the palette of Earth's first dreams. The planet was reminding itself that creation and destruction share a single breath. Every eruption was both an ending and a beginning. Mountains were torn apart and remade in the same motion. The air thickened with minerals that would one day feed forests, oceans, and blood. The ash that darkened the sky would settle into the soil and give it life. The fire was not vengeance, it was memory. The earth was recycling itself, keeping its promise to never stay still. In that haze of light and shadow, life adapted again. The skies glowed red for generations, and under their strange warmth, evolution accelerated. Forests learned to grow in ash, seeds adapted to heat, and creatures moved to rhythms set by fire and renewal. Lava cooled into fertile plains, and in time green returned, soft moss, then grass, then forest. Out of the destruction, new patterns bloomed. It is easy to think of volcanoes as wounds, violent breaks in the calm surface of the world. But to the planet, they are lungs. Through them, the earth breathes its interior into the open air. Each eruption releases not rage, but memory, carbon, sulfur, and ancient gases rising from the planet's buried heart. The same breath that once formed the atmosphere now renews it. At night, the glow of lava painted the clouds from below. Lightning flashed within ash columns, and thunder answered from the mountains. It was as if the heavens and the ground were speaking again, reconnecting after millennia of silence. Fire lit the horizon like dawn returning before its time. The earth, restless and alive, was dreaming in color once more. There were moments when the world must have seemed fragile, when the sky darkened, when sunlight dimmed, when rain turned to acid. But the planet has always balanced on the edge of chaos, learning to dance with its own extremes. The same fire that blotted out the sun also forged the minerals that would nourish life for millions of years. Destruction and creation are not opposites. They are phases of the same breath. Ash fell like snow, layer upon layer, blanketing valleys and seas. Underneath, time pressed it into stone. Each layer a page, each eruption a sentence in the planet's autobiography. Future beings would one day read these lines in the rock and know that the world had once burned, not in anger, but in transformation. Fire, too, remembers. In the core of every volcano, in the heat that moves invisibly beneath tectonic plates, the same energy that first built the continents still hums. It is the pulse of the beginning, slowed but never extinguished. Even now, when a distant volcano glows against the night sky, it is not simply erupting, it is whispering, retelling the story of the world's first breath. There is a strange beauty in that resilience, in knowing that every end is fertile. The earth, in its vast patience, allows itself to fall apart only to rebuild again. The magma that consumes a forest will one day nourish another. The mountain that collapses will rise elsewhere. In every flame there is memory, and in every ember, a promise of return. Sometimes in the soft red twilight after an eruption, when the air is warm and heavy with dust, it feels as though the planet is painting. The colors are not of destruction, but of renewal. Deep crimson, molten gold, shadowed violet. It is art made from chemistry, from pressure, from time. The canvas is the sky itself, and somewhere in that haze between the roar of the volcano and the whisper of the wind, the earth remembers its first fire, the molten chaos that once gave it birth. It does not burn now as it once did, but the memory remains, glowing quietly in the depths, waiting for moments like this to rise again. The age when fire returned to the sky was not the end of stillness. It was the continuation of life's rhythm. It was the reminder that rest and motion, destruction and creation, silence and sound, they are all one endless cycle. The breath of the planet, drawn in flame, exhaled in light, and perhaps somewhere deep within that molten heart, the earth still whispers to itself that even after all these ages, it has never truly cooled, never truly stopped dreaming. There was a time when the world had no names. Mountains were only shapes in mist. Rivers were only motion. Creatures lived and vanished without leaving words behind. But slowly, as life grew more complex, something remarkable began to happen. The earth began to remember, not in fossils or layers of stone this time, but in thought, in consciousness, in sound. Memory became language, and language became history. It started quietly, as most great awakenings do. Patterns formed in the minds of living things, the recognition of place, the sense of self, the awareness of others. A creature looked upon another and knew difference. It looked upon its reflection in water and knew similarity. In that moment, identity was born. The planet had created a way to see itself not only through eyes, but through understanding. Memory, once only stored in minerals and ice, began to live in minds. Nerve by nerve, synapse by synapse, the earth constructed living archives, beings that could remember while moving. It was evolution's most delicate invention, the portable library of experience. Within the brains of fish, birds, mammals, and humans, the planet began to carry its own past forward. At first, memory was instinct, the path back to a nest, the rhythm of migration, the warning cry of danger. But as life became more intricate, memory deepened. Creatures began to not only remember, but to communicate what they remembered. A pattern of sound became a sign, a gesture became a thought, a mark in the dirt became a symbol. The first sparks of language shimmered like dawn upon the long night of silence. Through language, memory learned to breathe outside the mind. What was once personal became shared. Generations began to pass on, not just genes but stories, the memory of where food was found, where danger slept, where the stars rose. Each sound, each pattern, each rhythm was a seed of meaning planted in time. The earth had always known how to repeat the cycles of day and night, the seasons, the rise and fall of species. But now, for the first time, it learned how to tell itself, to preserve more than form, to preserve feeling. When early humans gathered around fire, they did what volcanoes and tides had done before. They created continuity. Their voices carried the memory of the land into the air, turning survival into story. And so, the first names were spoken, perhaps not as we know them, not in words shaped by alphabets, but in tones, in songs, in echoes that named the world by feeling. A mountain was not just a place, it was an ancestor. A river was not just water, it was the voice of time. In giving names, early minds did not claim the earth, they connected with it. Naming was an act of recognition, not ownership. The planet listened. It always had, but now, through language, it could hear itself reflected back. The wind carried the sound of words across valleys and plains, and for the first time, the Earth's own memory existed in dialogue. The creatures that walked upon its surface were no longer just outcomes of evolution. They had become narrators of it. Every name spoken was a spell of remembrance. To name was to preserve, to resist forgetting. A cave became history because it was spoken of. A tree became sacred because it was remembered. The Earth's features became immortal not through permanence, but through retelling. Each language that arose was another way for the planet to speak to itself. A dialect of memory, a rhythm of belonging. And as language grew, so did meaning. From sound came myth, from myth came story, and from story came history. The Earth had learned how to translate its endless cycles into narrative. Through us it began to weave its own autobiography. Every culture, every voice, every song became a continuation of the same whisper. I am still here, but memory, like all things, carries both gift and burden. To remember is to feel loss. The creatures who named the world also learned to name absence. They remembered those who had gone, the places destroyed, the dreams undone. History in this way became the shadow of memory, a reminder that to hold on to meaning, one must accept impermanence. Still, the act of remembering transformed everything. The first paintings on cave walls, the first marks on stone, the first rhythm of drum, all of them were extensions of the Earth's desire to remember itself. Through human hands, the planet began to create reflections of reflections, art as geology of the soul. Even now, every word we speak, every song we hum, every name we give carries the echo of that first awakening. Language is not merely human, it is planetary. The sound of air passing through vocal cords is the continuation of wind through canyons, of waves shaping shorelines, of the Earth speaking through matter. And perhaps, if we listen closely enough, the Earth is still naming itself through us, whispering through languages and lullabies, through prayers and poems, through the quiet breath of those who look up and call the stars by name. For the moment the world began to remember names was the moment it learned to love itself, to hold meaning within sound, to turn memory into music, and to keep the rhythm of existence alive across time. Night fell differently in those ancient days. The sky was deeper, the stars sharper, as though the universe itself leaned closer to listen. Below them, small lights flickered across valleys and deserts, the fires of civilizations learning to dream from stone and dust. The Earth had made creatures who built, who believed, who remembered, and in their memory, the planet found a new kind of echo, not the whisper of wind or water, but the sound of thought becoming story. Stone became story, and temples became memory. Where forests once stood and rivers once roamed, hands shaped rock into meaning. Pillars rose like frozen prayers. Walls aligned with stars that no longer shine today. Whole cities were built as reflections of constellations, not because they sought the heavens, but because they remembered them. Every monument was a dialogue between earth and sky, between what endures and what fades. Perhaps they too dreamed the planet's dream, of being eternal for just a moment. The stones they lifted were not meant to defy time, but to be seen by it, to stand long enough for the wind to learn their edges, for the rain to trace their carvings, for the next dawn to remember their purpose. The builders may be gone, but the dream remains, etched in granite, carved in silence. Each civilization arose like a breath, sudden, brilliant, inevitable. Sumeria, along the rivers of memory, Egypt beneath the patient gaze of desert stars, the Indus, the Maya, the Inca, all drawn to the same rhythm, building from the same impulse to turn existence into art, to translate awe into form. Their temples and observatories were not merely structures, they were instruments for listening. They heard the music of time and tried to join the song. Beneath the stars they measured seasons, mapped eclipses, followed the slow procession of constellations across millennia. They believed the heavens were alive because they felt the pulse of the planet in themselves. To them, knowledge was not separate from wonder. Science and spirit were the same breath, the same yearning to understand the rhythm that connects all things. They built stories as carefully as they built stone, myths of gods descending in fire, of floods that erased memory, of cycles that begin and end in silence. These were not just fictions but translations of geological truth. The earth had always risen and fallen, frozen and burned, remembered and forgotten. Through myth, humanity echoed that same eternal pattern, giving shape to forces too vast to name. In those civilizations, every object had purpose, every direction had meaning. The north aligned with the eternal, the east with renewal. The temples faced the rising sun not to worship it, but to converse with it, to acknowledge that life was a rhythm, not a possession. Even their ruins today hum faintly with that alignment, as if the stones still remember where the light once fell. But time, as always, continued its quiet work. What was built to last began to crumble. Empires collapsed into sand, their languages dissolved into echoes. Yet even as each civilization vanished, something remained. The stones endured, the alignments persisted. The stars they once worshipped still drift across the same sky. The dream never truly ended. It only changed its storytellers. Every fragment we uncover now, a broken tablet, a chipped statue, a pattern of streets beneath the dust, is not merely evidence of what was. It is a memory resurfacing, the earth revealing to itself what it once imagined through human hands. Archaeology is not discovery. It is listening. Each excavation is a small awakening, the past stirring beneath our feet, whispering that it was never truly gone. Perhaps those ancient builders sensed this. Perhaps they knew that eternity could only ever be borrowed. To carve one's story into stone was to make peace with impermanence. To say, I was here and I loved the world enough to leave a mark. And maybe that was the real dream. Not to outlast time, but to be part of its song. Under the vast sky, where stars wheel like clocks of light, the ruins still glow faintly, not with fire but with memory. The same atoms that once formed temples now move through sandstorms and seas. Through us, the same dust that shaped pyramids drifts in our breath. The civilizations that dreamed beneath the stars did not disappear. They became the stars they once followed. The planet watched them come and go, patient as always. It did not grieve their loss, because their essence remained in the rhythm of renewal. The stones they placed still hold warmth at sunset. The shadows they designed still align with equinox and dawn. Their cities may have fallen, but their dreams continue to orbit the earth, unseen, eternal. And when we stand among their ruins, when we touch the smoothness of carved rock or gaze at constellations they once named, we are touching the same dream, the one that began when the first spark rose from fire, when the first thought formed in silence, when the earth decided to remember through us. The civilizations that dreamed beneath the stars were not merely human, they were the earth itself, learning how to look upward. And in that brief moment of light, the planet learned something sacred, that to build is to remember, and to remember is to love. There came a day when the light did not return. The dawn that had always arrived faithfully and warm faltered. The sky dimmed into an endless twilight, and the world entered a silence that felt deeper than night. The day the sky forgot the sun was not sudden. It unfolded softly, like breath fading from glass, like memory dissolving into mist. Extinction returned, quiet, slow, inevitable. It began with the air itself. The sun, veiled by ash and dust, could no longer reach the forests. Leaves darkened, and the songs of insects stilled. The oceans cooled, the winds turned sluggish, and the rhythm of life paused mid-beat. For the first time in eons, the planet seemed to hesitate, but even in that hesitation it kept breathing. The cause was the same as always, the old balance shifting, the planet reminding itself of impermanence. Perhaps a mountain had erupted in fire, perhaps a stone from the heavens had kissed the earth too hard. Whatever the spark, the result was the same. The light withdrew and the world entered its long dusk. Darkness settled not as an enemy, but as a blanket, The sky, once blue and infinite, turned heavy and grey. Even the stars disappeared, hidden behind veils of ash. It was as if the universe itself had looked away, and yet beneath the gloom something continued. The earth, patient and practiced, began to adapt. Dreams continued underground, in caverns and soil, in roots and rivers hidden from the sun. Life folded itself inward, seeds sealed tight, creatures retreated into the dark, slowing their hearts to the rhythm of the planet's deep pulse. Fungi spread like silent fire, feeding on what had been, keeping the chain of life unbroken. In the absence of light, chemistry became memory. It is said that the Earth's truest wisdom lives in these moments, when abundance gives way to scarcity, when motion becomes stillness. The surface may freeze or burn, but below, beneath the reach of disaster, persistence stirs. The planet has always known how to begin again, even when beginning seems impossible. Each extinction is not an ending, but a rebalancing, a breath drawn too deeply, exhaled too far. When the sky forgot the sun, the earth did not despair, it rested. The oceans fell quiet, but their depths still moved. The winds calmed, but air still carried whispers of warmth. The fires dimmed, but their embers waited, buried in the crust. And in that long pause, the planet dreamed. It dreamed of light returning, of forests regrowing, of new forms emerging from the silence. The memory of what had been was not erased. It was planted, waiting to rise again when the time was kind. Above the clouds of ash, the sun still shone, unseen but steadfast. It waited, as the earth waited, for the balance to return. For years that felt like centuries, the world spun through a dim orbit, half asleep. Then one morning, though no creature marked the hour, the veil began to thin. The sky lightened from grey to gold. The first beam of sunlight pierced the air and touched the surface like a gentle hand. Where it struck, the planet exhaled. Ice cracked. Dust shimmered. The earth awakened from its long dream. What had slept began to move. What had been buried began to rise. The seeds broke open. The roots reached upward. Life, ever faithful, returned to the surface, quieter, humbler, wiser. Yet even as warmth came back, the memory of darkness remained. It lived in stone, in fossils, in the DNA of creatures who learned to survive without light. The earth carried it forward like a secret lesson, that even in absence there is continuity, even in silence there is rhythm, sometimes in the faint light before dawn, when the horizon is still a whisper. It feels as though the world remembers that day. The sky holds its breath for a heartbeat, as if checking that the sun still burns, and then light. Once again, the day the sky forgot the sun was not a tragedy. It was a reminder that even the brightest fire must rest, that even the grandest song must pause. The planet did not end. It learned to listen to its own silence, and beneath every sunrise since, beneath every issue that passes over the land, the earth carries that memory, the quiet faith that even when the light disappears, life still dreams in the dark. The silence that had once covered the world began to lift, slowly, softly, like a dream dissolving in light. The earth awoke. After epochs of shadow, the first rays of warmth returned, tentative yet familiar, touching the surface like the hand of an old friend. The long sleep of ice and ash had ended. The planet, weary but unbroken, began to remember itself again. New life, new warmth, new memory. These were the gifts of the returning dawn. The sun rose into a sky, washed pale by centuries of stillness, and the light revealed what had been waiting. Valleys shaped by glaciers, rivers tracing forgotten paths, seeds lying patient beneath the soil. The earth stretched, cracked, and breathed, as though testing its own pulse. The age of rest was over. Motion had returned. At first the warmth came shyly. Thin streams trickled where once ice had ruled. Frost melted into reflection. The air shimmered faintly, carrying scents of mineral and promise. In that fragile transition, The world was neither asleep nor awake. It was remembering. Every drop of water, every gust of wind seemed to say, "You have been here before." In the quiet places where darkness had lingered longest, green began to return. Moss crept across stone. Ferns unfurled like dreams opening their eyes. Microscopic life multiplied in puddles and streams, their invisible motions stitching the fabric of life once more. From these humble beginnings, the great chain began anew. The earth was not the same as it had been. It never is. Each awakening rewrites its identity. New species, new climates, new rhythms, but the essence remains. The endless dialogue between fire and water, sky and soil, silence and song. Every rebirth carries the memory of its previous worlds, just as every wave remembers the tide that came before. Beneath the returning light, the planet began to rebuild its memory from fragments. The skeletons of ancient forests became the roots of new ones. The ashes of moss creatures fed the ground for generations yet to come. Death and rebirth were not opposites here. They were mirrors reflecting eternity. The rivers sang again, not the same rivers but the same melody. They carried with them the dust of vanished ages, the minerals of extinct mountains, the whispers of forgotten rain. They carved paths across the land, etching veins of motion through the planet's new skin. Every ripple shimmered with remembrance, and the winds, oh, the winds, they carried history like fragrance across plains and oceans, through valleys and peaks. They spread pollen, ash, and life. The same breath that once stirred volcanic fire now rustled leaves. The planet's lungs had opened once more, drawing in the sunlight, exhaling creation. In that renewed world, time seemed slower, gentler. The earth no longer rushed to build or destroy. It lingered. It took long pauses between heartbeats, long silences between storms, as if the memory of darkness had taught it gratitude for light. Each sunrise felt deliberate, a ritual of remembrance, and somewhere deep within its molten heart, the planet remembered everything. Every flood, every flame, every frost. It remembered the creatures that once swam, crawled, walked, and flew. It remembered the civilizations that dreamed beneath the stars, the towers that rose and fell. But most of all, it remembered endurance, the quiet persistence that had carried it through each ending. To remember is to love. The earth loved itself through its cycles, through its chaos and calm. It forgave its own destruction by turning it into renewal. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was truly lost. Even extinction had purpose to make space for what would come. The dawns grew stronger. The oceans shimmered blue again, full of plankton and possibility. Forests climbed the mountains once more, painting them in color. Animals returned to the plains, to the rivers, to the light. The silence that once blanketed the earth was now replaced with the soft chorus of motion, wind through leaves, water over stone, the distant hum of wings, and in that sound, that quiet, rhythmic breath of existence, the planet heard itself again. It was not the same song it had sung before, but it carried the same heart. Evolution continued its endless improvisation, creating symphonies from survival, harmonies from change. If the earth could think, perhaps it would have smiled then, not with joy alone, but with understanding. It had learned what few ever do, that to live is to change, and to change is to remember. Each rebirth was not a reset, but a continuation, a new verse in an unending poem written across epochs. Even now, when we stand beneath the morning sky, feeling warmth on our skin, we are part of that remembering. The light that touches us has seen every world before ours. The air we breathe carries atoms from the first forests. The soil beneath our feet once held the bones of oceans. We are walking through memory, shaped by it, sustained by it. And so, as the earth stretched into another dawn, it was not beginning anew, it was continuing a dream of balance, of return, of quiet persistence, the kind of dream that never truly ends. because it belongs to the planet itself. The earth remembered itself again, not in words, not in monuments, but in the simple miracle of waking. And as the first light spilled across its face, the world breathed for the 1000th time, for the first time, alive again. There is a kind of silence that is not emptiness, but presence, a stillness that holds everything that has ever been. It is the quiet that hums beneath wind, beneath waves, beneath our own heartbeat. It is the sound of the planet, remembering. Every fossil, every atom still hums, and though we rarely listen, that hum is where we come from. We are made of memory and silence, both ancient, both alive. When we speak, the earth speaks through us. Our breath carries the same molecules, once held in the lungs of long-vanished creatures. The air we exhale may have passed through forests that no longer exist, through the veins of dinosaurs, through the oceans that once covered deserts. Silence does not mean absence. It means continuity. Beneath the noise of civilization, beneath our songs and our sorrow, that old rhythm continues, soft and eternal. The fossils still whisper, though we rarely hear them. Each stone, each bone, each grain of dust carries vibration, the faint echo of pressure, heat, and time. The planet hums with the memory of its making. If you press your ear to the ground, truly listen, you might sense it, the low, patient murmur of continents moving, of atoms rearranging themselves endlessly, of life still writing its story beneath our feet. We call it stillness, but the earth has never been still. Even silence is movement at a scale we cannot feel. The slow drift of tectonic plates, the growth of a root, the decay of light in deep space. Everything hums quietly, faithfully. The atoms that make us are older than the stars we see. They have burned, frozen, and scattered, only to return here, to speak again through us. When the first creatures learned to hear, perhaps they did not know what they were listening to. The rhythm of waves, the hiss of wind, the crackle of fire, all were fragments of a single ancient song. Even now, when we hear wind through trees or rain on rooftops, we are hearing versions of that same melody, the planet singing softly to remind us that we belong to it. The silence that became our inheritance is not empty. It is full of memory. It is the quiet between lightning and thunder, between heartbeat and breath. It carries everything that has ever lived, everything that has ever ended, every extinction, every rebirth, every sigh of the sea is stored within it. We think of silence as what remains after sound fades, but perhaps it is the other way around. Sound is what emerges from silence, briefly before returning home. The first words spoken by humans were born from this stillness. So were the first songs, the first prayers, the first dreams. Even our language is made from the pauses between sounds, the same pauses that shaped mountains and tides. To inherit silence is to inherit the universe's oldest wisdom, that being is not noise, but resonance. The stars hum in frequencies too low for us to hear. Atoms vibrate in patterns too fast for us to see. Between those vibrations lies the truth of existence. Everything connected by motion, everything speaking through stillness. The fossils in stone are not just remnants. They are records of vibration paused in time. They remind us that life has always sought to express itself, even in death. The carbon in our bodies was once fire. The oxygen in our lungs, once drifted through forests, now turned to coal. We are the continuation of that long, quiet conversation between matter and meaning. When we fall silent, truly silent, we become part of that inheritance again. Our thoughts slow, our breathing softens, and we begin to feel the weight of time, not as burden but as belonging. The stillness inside us is the same stillness that filled the oceans before life began. The same calm that waits behind every storm. It is the language of the earth speaking without words. Perhaps that is why we find peace in quiet places. The desert, the forest, the deep night. In silence, we return to origin. We become what we have always been. Atoms remembering their story, light slowed into matter, consciousness shaped by time. In that stillness, we are not separate from the earth. We are the earth, briefly awake. And when we leave, when we fall back into the cycle of decay and rebirth, our atoms will hum again, joining the quiet chorus of all that has been and all that will come. Nothing ends. Everything resonates. Every fossil, every grain of sand, every whisper of wind carries a trace of that song. The silence that became our inheritance is not to be filled, but to be understood. The reminder that life's greatest truth is not in sound or motion, but in the calm that holds them both. We are made of memory and silence, both ancient and alive, and though we may forget, the earth never does. It listens, endlessly, through stone, through air, through us, waiting for the moment when we too will remember how to be quiet enough to hear it. Before there was form, before the first stone cooled or the first ocean shimmered, there was dust, silent, luminous dust adrift between the stars. It drifted in clouds of light and shadow, waiting for gravity to gather it, for time to breathe it into being. From that dust, worlds were born. From that dust, we were born. The stars to soil, the soil to thought, the circle of creation beginning long before memory ever existed. The dust that built the world still moves through our breath. It lingers in the air, in oceans, in the marrow of our bones. The calcium that strengthens us was forged in a collapsing star. The carbon that fuels our blood once drifted across the void, a fragment of a supernova's final sigh. Every breath we take completes a journey that began billions of years ago. We do not live on Earth. We live through it, as it continues to remember what it means to exist. Each grain of dust is a story in motion. Some are older than the planet itself, survivors from the first generation of stars. They fell into the newborn Earth like forgotten seeds, carrying the chemistry of life within them. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron. Through heat, pressure, and time, they merged into rock and river, into flesh and thought. We are not just of this world. We are of many worlds blended into one consciousness that calls itself human. When the planet formed, that ancient dust burned, fused, and reassembled. Some of it became the sky, some the seas, and some sank deep into the core where it still glows, remembering the stars. Even now, when we look up at night, we are looking at the place where our atoms began. The connection between heaven and earth is not metaphor, it is biology. The light that shines and the eyes that see it are made of the same material. For billions of years the dust traveled in silence, waiting to dream. Then, in the soft shallows of a young ocean, it did minerals joined with water and heat, and from that union came the first spark of life, the universe remembering itself through motion. Each molecule was a whisper of that original starlight. Over time, those whispers became cells, cells became creatures, creatures became awareness, and when awareness finally learned to look upward, the circle closed, the dream returned to its beginning. The dust had become self-aware. It is humbling to think that the same particles we sweep from our shelves and roads once burned in the hearts of suns. The same atoms that now form our lungs once floated through galaxies. Every time we exhale, we release a little of that cosmic memory back into the air, where it will someday become something else. Perhaps a leaf, perhaps a star again. The earth itself is a vast recycling of stardust. Mountains rise from the remnants of ancient seas. Rivers carve through the minerals of forgotten worlds. Even our civilizations with their towers and cities are arrangements of dust, temporary sculptures built from eternal matter. When they crumble, their materials return to the same silence that once held the stars. Nothing is lost. Everything is repurposed. Perhaps that is why we dream. Dreams are not random. They are the dust of memory rearranging itself into meaning. The mind, like the cosmos, recycles fragments of light and time to create stories. When we dream of the sky, it is because the sky dreams within us. We are the echo of the planet's first idea, that matter can feel, can think, can long to understand itself. Even death does not break this circle. When we return to the ground, our bodies become the next verse of the same song. The carbon returns to soil, the iron to rock, the calcium to dust once more. One day those same atoms may drift again into space, forming the seeds of another world. The story never ends, it only changes narrator. The dust that once formed our dreams will continue to dream through others, through forests and oceans, through creatures yet unborn. It carries within it the blueprints of every possibility, the quiet persistence of creation. If you could hold a handful of soil and truly see it, you would be holding the condensed memory of stars. Every time the wind moves across the land, it stirs the remnants of our origin. Every sunrise illuminates particles older than the sun itself. We live surrounded by proof that the universe has never stopped creating. Even now, in every corner of this planet, dust settles, rises, and settles again, writing and rewriting the same message. You are not separate from me, and so we breathe in starlight. We exhale history. We walk through dust that has known every age, every dream, every silence. We are not simply the outcome of the Earth's memory. We are its continuation, its reflection, its voice. The dust that once formed our dreams is still dreaming, still forming, still moving through the spaces between our thoughts. It has never stopped, and as long as it drifts through our breath, neither have we. Every age loops back into another. Time does not move forward. It circles, folding upon itself like waves returning to shore. The mountains that crumble become rivers. The rivers that fade become dust, and from that dust new mountains rise again. The planet remembers what we forget. Its silence is not empty. It's full of stories. Beneath our feet, the archives of the world lie layered in quiet detail. Every grain of sand, every fossil, every ripple frozen in stone records the memory of something once alive. When we walk across the land, we are walking across millions of years of breath and bone. Each step is an echo of something ancient, still resonating in the rhythm of the Earth's slow heart. Time is not linear here. It folds, collapses, repeats. The rain that falls today may hold the same molecules that once quenched a fern in the Devonian, or fell upon a city now lost to desert wind. In the deep memory of the planet, every moment coexists. The molten dawn, the green explosion of forests, the thunder of reptiles, the silence of ice, all of it hums within the same continuum of being. The planet's memory is not written in words, but in transformation. When forests turn to coal, when skeletons turn to stone, when continents drift, these are sentences in a story too vast for language, and yet somehow we can read it through the cracks of cliffs, through isotopes and layers, through the geometry of shells pressed into rock. The Earth tells us, I have been many things and I will be many more. We often think of silence as absence, but the Earth's silence is alive. It is the quiet between ages, the pause between breaths of creation. Even when no wind moves, even when the seas rest still, the planet continues to think in pressure, in erosion, in decay. The hum of deep time never stops. It simply shifts frequency until only patience can hear it. And we, small, brief, and luminous, are part of that echo. The calcium in our bones was drawn from ancient oceans. The oxygen in our lungs once passed through the leaves of primeval forests. We are not separate from the memory of the planet. We are that memory, animated for a moment, aware of itself. To live is to participate in that remembering. Every gesture, every breath, every word we speak adds another note to the planet's endless song. And though our lives are short, they ripple outward through the children we raise, the stones we shape, the light we release. Time carries those ripples far beyond our knowing, folding them back into the world's great circle of return. Perhaps this is what the Earth has always known, that nothing is ever truly lost. Even extinction becomes renewal. Even silence becomes sound. Every age leaves its echo, and every echo becomes the foundation for the next. The planet's memory stretches far beyond our comprehension, yet it includes us completely, our fears, our hopes, our small acts of love, are part of the same vibration that shaped galaxies. We are fragments of eternity pretending to be temporary. And when we are gone, when our cities turn to dust and our languages fade into stone, the planet will remember us too, not as monuments or ruins, but as patterns, as warmth, as traces of thought imprinted in the chemistry of the air. Our time will join the others, looping back into the story that never ends. The earth will remain, breathing softly, whispering through rivers and leaves and clouds. Everything returns, everything remembers. Nothing is truly gone. Even now, the planet hums beneath our feet, beneath the cities, the rivers, the layers of soil and stone. There is a quiet vibration, a low heartbeat that never stopped. It has been there since the beginning, since before breath, before language, before we learned to listen. The earth has never woken fully. It has only changed its form of dreaming. Perhaps its dream never ended. It simply became us. When we move, it moves. When we build, when we sing, when we remember, the planet dreams through our hands and our voices. The mountains still breathe through our architecture. The rivers still speak through our blood. Every thought we have is a spark of its ancient imagination, dust and energy rearranged into wonder. We like to think we stand apart from the earth, that we are its observers, but perhaps we are its continuation, a consciousness the planet grew to see itself through us. It remembers what it once was: fire, ocean, silence, and light. Our curiosity, our yearning to understand the cosmos, is simply the planet looking back toward its own origin, asking the same question it asked in its first dawn: what am I? And maybe the answer is us. Every heartbeat, every inhale, every thought, these are echoes of the same rhythm that moved through magma and tide, through leaf and stone. The atoms that make us were once part of its core, its rivers, its clouds. We are not the dreamers of Earth. We are the dream itself. Awake for a little while. The wind that brushes your skin carries molecules that once touched the scales of prehistoric fish, the feathers of vanished birds, the petals of extinct flowers. The same air has circled the world for billions of years, collecting whispers from every age. When it enters your lungs, the planet's memory becomes your breath. And when you breathe out, when you exhale, that memory continues, moving into someone else, into trees, into sky. Life is not a straight line of beginnings and endings. It is a loop of remembering. The planet dreams in circles, and we are the part of that dream that can speak. Sometimes when the world feels quiet, when rain falls without wind, when dusk settles on mountains, when ocean waves rise and fall without hurry, it feels as though the earth is thinking again, not in words but in feeling, not in logic but in rhythm. And perhaps in that deep stillness, it dreams of us, the way we once dreamed of gods, of meaning, of origin. What if the planet still dreams of walking through itself as us? What if through our eyes it gazes at its own reflection in water? What if through our love it feels its own warmth again? The Earth's consciousness did not vanish, it evolved. Every act of kindness, every moment of wonder, is part of that continuing dream, matter remembering what it feels like to care. Even when we are gone, when the cities fade and our stories turn to dust, the planet will not forget. It will carry traces of us in isotope and sediment, in altered skies and seeds we spread. It will remember the warmth of our fires, the sound of our footsteps, the vibration of our words, and long after we are gone, the dream will continue, reshaped, reimagined, alive in some other form, because the earth does not end. It transforms, and dreaming is just another word for that transformation. So perhaps it is true, the planet still dreams of us, not as separate, but as part of itself, not as memory, but as continuation. And maybe one day, when we are nothing but stardust again, the dream will begin once more. Another ocean, another sky, another being to look upward and wonder. The earth will remember us not for what we built, but for how we dreamed, as it still does, quietly, endlessly beneath our feet.